Hello, welcome back to the High Existence Podcast. I am your host, John Brooks, and today we have a returning guest, my good friend, my brother, my High Existence collaborator, and the Director of Operations on Apotheosis Retreat, Eric Brown. The last podcast we did was a major hit. We talked about spirituality and productivity and deep work. This episode centers all around Eric's recent experience of going into the Peruvian jungle, cut off from civilization, to follow a very specific dieta for 3 weeks that included a total of 9 plant medicine ceremonies and 3 Kambo ceremonies. I think we can all agree that psychedelics are a great way to see how our ordinary mind works. Psychedelics can reveal patterns that are going on all the time, but until we see them under the intense spotlight of plant medicine, we don't quite understand these patterns that are running us. There is so much advice online about set and setting and dosage and what you should do and what you shouldn't do, how you should navigate a difficult psychedelic experience and the like. For me, one of the people that I go to the most for advice is Eric. And the reason why is because whenever I speak to Eric about a plant medicine ceremony that he's engaged in, he's always able to lucidly explain exactly what happened and then explain with vivid clarity how he was able to navigate the storm. He is someone who doesn't overcomplicate things. All of the classic techniques like breathing, being mindful, cognitively distancing yourself, surrendering, he's gotten down to a fine art. And when you hear him speak about it, it has this strange effect of teaching you how it should be done. Because it's one thing to kind of get it, and then it's another thing to be able to do it when stuff gets tricky. So in this episode, it was my pleasure to spend 3.5 hours going very deep with Eric, where we cover things such as, of course, his experience, his psychedelic experience, the trap of viewing retreats as the next spiritual high and how to get the most from such a retreat, the difference between sort of lying and bullshitting and rationalizing, and how you can stop fooling yourself so you can really level up. Eric goes into his view on meditation and mindfulness and sort of the classic pillars of his spiritual practice. Eric discusses the preparation, the experience, and the integration of working with plant medicines. Of course, we go into Eric's specific strategies to working with bad trips, his unusual experiences in the day-to-day life, how he was able to work with discipline to keep his mind focused, how to communicate, literally communicate with plant medicine, and of course, everything in between. If you are interested in things like ayahuasca, psilocybin, healing through plant medicine, you might want to go on a retreat, or you've been on a retreat and you want to integrate that experience, this episode is a goldmine of really useful wisdom. Without further ado, this is me in conversation with Eric Brown. You've been on an unusual journey over the last couple of weeks, couple of months. In fact, you've been on quite a journey for the last couple of years, actually, with the retreats that you've been on. To my knowledge, you've been on 5 retreats, 5 plant medicine-based retreats in the last year or so, give or take. I know that for 4 of those retreats, they lasted around a week. And you've just come back from a retreat in Peru that went for 3 weeks. So where I want to start is, can you give us a background into your experience with these kinds of retreats and go through each one from 1 to 5, how they differed from each other and how you grew as a person? And if we feel like we want to go off on side tangents as you're explaining this, we can do that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first distinction I'll draw is there is a slight difference or flavor between a diet and a retreat. So the one I just did, the 3-week, was technically a plant diet, and we can get into the differences there. And the first 4 were our own high existence apotheosis retreats. The first four, the retreats that we ran and meeting the team and also participating in them myself was eye-opening. The first retreat, I was also really, if I'm being honest, still in the process of exploring this world and this space. I'd always been interested in, the whole personal growth, self-optimization scene, but always from a productive output frame. How much can you do? How much work can you get done? Rather than who can you become and what can you do? And really, it just cascaded in. I get faced with the question of, like, why would you do one of these more than once? Like, what is the value? And really, fundamentally, it's after doing one, you're a different person. Really completely. Particularly if you dive, like, super deep into process, you can fundamentally transform. And with that brings, like, a whole different life, right? A whole different set of goals, a whole different personality structure, a whole different set of problems and challenges that you face. So for all the same reasons that you would go into one, you can continue to go into more. As long as it doesn't come from this place of chasing the experience or like escaping life, but if you can do it from a frame of really embracing and running towards life and really doing the integration in the meantime, right? Because with all of these, if a lesson comes up and you do nothing about it, you'll just get slapped with the same lesson again going in the next round. Because that's the next step. It's laid out right in front of you, and you can't just pick and choose the ones that you want to deal with. But if you can actually do the lessons, then we'll get somewhere pretty quick.
If someone has just been on a plant medicine retreat or a meditation retreat or any kind of experience where they're tapping into spiritual states or experiencing some form of inner transformation, how are they to discern if they are to go on another retreat in a month, 6 months, a year? Because what can often happen is that individuals will be like, I experienced a lot of peak emotions. I need to go back on another retreat ASAP. I've got to sell something, raise the money, and get back out there. And this isn't inherently bad, because, there are countless people who have lived this kind of life and they're doing incredible things and they've reached a level of contentment that most of us never reach. But then there are also these tragic cases where people are just chasing the next high, the next spiritual high, which is just a form of spiritual hedonism. So how does one make the right choice when it comes to attending retreats?
I think this frame is going to come up a lot in this conversation, and it comes up a lot in our own discussions as a team. The difference between escapism and embracism. This embracism is a term that we've kind of been trying to pioneer. I bring this up because if you can be honest with yourself, and that in itself is a whole process, can you actually be honest with yourself? If you can discern quite easily whether you're running away from your life and the things that you have to do, or if you're running back towards continued process and continued growth. And again, this will circle back a lot to the process of integration, right? For many, it can be a somewhat nebulous term, like, what does that mean? Am I integrated? Did I do all the integration from my last experience? But if you can get really clear on it, like come back, or even during your experience, like write down the things that have come up that you need to go home and do. And some of those things can be really tiny. I need to tell my friend that I'm sorry for that thing I did a couple months ago because it's still taking up bandwidth. That's a 20-minute task, right? Some are larger. Some are like, I need to make a career transition because it's slowly eating away at me and taking away all of my vitality. That's a that can be a much larger process. That might be a few months, that might be a year. And so if you can check in and be like, have I really, truly integrated and embodied the lessons that came up? If you can, if you have, sure, keep going. You know, the path continues to extend further in front of you, and you can take those next steps. But do it from that space of, I love life, I love me, and I want to play this game as well as I can, instead of just, oh, this is hard, I don't want to do the thing that I was shown that I had to integrate, so instead I'll just run away, try to get away from it, and see if there's a different, easier lesson that comes up for me. And you know, if you do that, particularly if it's with a medicine experience, like, that lesson will come and come crashing down back on you again.
So I was going to ask you, so what is the danger of not integrating and keeping going on these kind of retreats or chasing these states? Is it that you're just going to suffer more overall? You're going to keep getting the same lessons until you change? Like, what are the costs of doing that?
Well, look, at the end of the day, like, life is meant to be enjoyed here. Like, if you've found an outlet that you genuinely enjoy, like, all the power to you. That's amazing for you. But yeah, there's certainly, I think, first of all, it's just what is the story you're telling yourself as to why you're coming on this? It's probably something along the lines of, I want to heal, I want to grow, I want to be better for myself and others. And if you're not integrating those lessons, like, are you ever actually moving towards those aims? Probably not, right? Like, probably not. And there is a very real possibility. You know, I love this line, the lesson repeats as necessary. This is why people can get into 3 or 4 different relationships with entirely different people and still have the same problems come up, right? The lesson is repeating until you learn it, right? And it can be very difficult, right? If you're lying in ceremony and for hours you are being shown why you haven't done this, all the ways that you still haven't done it, having to sit and feel that. That experience in itself can be important, but it can also be difficult, and you could have likely avoided it had you taken the time to really just show up and integrate in your life back at home.
So going back to the retreats that you've been on, can you continue with the story of your own transformation? You jumped off at the point where you said that you have been attending a lot of retreats. That's what led to this current discussion.
Sure. So the very first one, I was really just getting started with high existence in the team, making myself known, and this was my opportunity to meet everyone for the first time in person. And seeing viscerally and feeling it myself, I had my own process, but seeing what was possible at this week fundamentally changed the rest of my life. Like, immediately I was like, this is it, this is the space that I want to be in, and this is the gift that I want to bring to the world, right? I want anyone who is interested in this work to be able to have a space to do this. And I expressed that as much to the team. I was like, look, I will do anything required to help steward this process and bring it to people. And really, the subsequent retreat experiences have been a continued process of that, of taking on more responsibility to orchestrate the events, and also getting really clear, which can be a difficult process, of the ways that I'm still lacking to be able to show up, right? Like, how's my facilitation? Can I listen and empathize with people really? Like, can I really do that? Can I facilitate ceremony? Can I assist people in deep process? Right? And anything that came up where it was like, oh no, you're still lacking here, through the second, third, and fourth, like, I would just systematically address those. You know, I think we share a deep sentiment on this, of the overlap and how actually similar things like deep work and discipline are to this space. And I just I just sat straight into a big student disciple mentality, and I was like, I'm ready to learn because this is exactly where I want to be, and it's exactly the work I want to give to people. So I'm ready, show me the ways I'm lacking. And a bunch of things came up. Things like personal confidence, being able to speak and articulate myself clearly to people, just the nuances of facilitation and the psychology of transformation, and even the neuroscience of it. So any time a lesson came up and indicated itself, I just jumped on it and continued to work through it. And it's been mirrored back by some of the team here. It's been mirrored back by some of the people who attend, particularly our most recent one in June, of the work paying off. The one we had in June, for the first time, I actually got many comments of people singling me out and being like, wow, that thing you did, that thing you said to me, the way you held space there was really important to my process. Right? And so it shows if you can be diligent and actually take the work seriously and integrate the lessons, it's actually unbelievable how quickly you can continue to progress.
So so there are a couple of things that are vague to me, even though I work in this space, and they're not vague to me on an intuitive level, but I haven't found many people who are able to articulate them well. So this creates an issue when people are listening to conversations like ours, where if you know, you know, and if you don't know, you haven't got a clue what we're talking about, which sucks. So let's clear up some terms. When you say things like deep in process, what does that mean? So that's one area to cover, deep in process. What is that? Another one is what are people trying to get? I know it sounds like a 5-year-old's question, but really, why would you go on a retreat other than it's a nice trip away, you get to meet cool people, it feels good? What is the ultimate goal? What kind of transformation can you expect? Because transformation is a word that's used all the time, get abs in 30 days, you can transform into someone with a six-pack in 30 days, you can make more money in 30 days, you can transform in these ways, but what kind of transformation are people getting on these kinds of retreats? Finally, so we have deep in process, we have the kind of goals that people are trying to attain while on these retreats, and finally, what are some of the most common mistakes people make in ordinary life that sort of oppose the lessons and the insights that you've had from working with people on these retreats?
Cool. So I'm gonna answer the second one first. Why would people come and what can they get? Because this will then paint a better picture of what deep in process looks like. I think it's pretty easy to agree to the fact that you shouldn't go to the gym and work out for 36 hours straight without taking a break, right? You'll fatigue and you'll likely cause yourself great injury, right? Most people would agree that you probably shouldn't stay up for 4 days straight, right? Sleep is a fundamental mechanism in the human being, right? And it's extremely important. Those are just on the timeline or the time span of a single day, right? So you have a necessity for rest, space, stillness, and recovery built into a single day. Why would that not zoom up to a higher timeline of something like a few months or a year, where if this is what's causing, in my opinion, the burnout epidemic sweeping through the West and sweeping through millennial culture and the tech startup scene. If you've been outputting at a really high level for months or weeks or years without break, that's going to have an impact on you. Whether you like it or not, it's very difficult to sustain that level of output. And not only is it difficult to sustain, is it just smart? Is that how you want to live? Period. Right? This is why mandatory vacation time is still a thing. We inherently recognize the need for this space, and this really sets the scene for what we can do with something, or why a retreat space is valuable. There's also a little more nuanced things, like when you're, particularly if you're in a big like urban city, like you are always in relation to someone or something. You play the character of a son, a partner, a friend, an employee, a citizen of this country. You have so many roles and the responsibilities and the personality traits that come with those things. But who are you? Who are you when you're by yourself, not in relation to any of those things? That's something that many of us have never even had the experience of, like deep, authentic self-knowledge. And so removing ourselves from all of those things lets us take this like third person perspective on ourselves. Like, oh, this is how I act. This is how motivated I am when I'm by myself and I'm not being forced from the work environment to work. Right? It creates this breathing room where you can really start to turn inward and look at who you are and whether you like the things you're doing or not. Because when you're just heads down in your phone with your blinders on, your calendar is booked 6 or 7 days a week with obligations, you lose perspective on all of that. You lose perspective on even, do I like doing these things? Or are they just habitual? If you can take yourself out and get that really high level view, there's an immense value that can come from that. The reasons that individual people show up, there are a whole lot, and it really depends on where you're coming from. A more extreme example is something like, imagine you had a really traumatic childhood event. Doesn't much matter what it is, but that's never been like fully resolved. You never let yourself look at it because it's uncomfortable and it's difficult and it's scary and it makes you feel ashamed that it happened to you. All this stuff, right? You can't talk about it with other people because then you're like the downer of the group and all this stuff, right? That plays out in all of your interactions. Maybe you don't trust people enough. Maybe you can't look them in the eye. Maybe you hate the way your body looks. Right? You can't look at yourself in the mirror. You can't honestly look yourself in the mirror and say like, yeah, I love you. Like, you're a good person. That's a tragedy. So some will come to do really difficult work like that. Like, I do not want to live like this anymore. I'm not exactly sure what I need to overcome this, but I know I at least need the space and the time and the energy to work on it. Because it's big. It's big. Some of this stuff is quite difficult to work through. Maybe you don't have that. Like maybe you feel really good, but maybe you feel like you're just going through the motions of your life. Go to school, go to university, get some sort of a job in the city, get a house, get a wife. And like, it's good, but is it great? Is it what you actually want? Have you actually determined that this is exactly the life that you want? So there's a whole value again of having this like unstructured human playground of discovery to figure out what you want to do with your life. Like really setting a North Star that like will get you up every day early in the morning being like, fuck yeah. Like a litmus test for this is like, do you enjoy waking up on Monday? And like if you say no, honestly, Mondays are awesome. Every day is awesome. Like you should be able to wake up and be like, fuck yes. It might be difficult, I might have challenges in my day, but goddamn, I'm working towards something beautiful that I have chosen. That wasn't just given to me or forced upon me. And there are some who just come like, hey, I really enjoy this space. I really enjoy I love the playground of self-discovery, like term. Like people who just love working on themselves and to pair it with beautiful people in a beautiful space, doing this beautiful work, that in itself is value enough. And so you have this somewhat isolated environment, you have this somewhat large task that you've put yourself up to, doing big healing work, really digging into who you are and what you want, really taking the time to get rid of your phone twitch or something, right? These are not inconsequential. There's no magic pill or light switch where you just flick it and it's suddenly completely resolved. There are layers and layers of programming and self-narrative and deception and delusion that you have to work through to actually resolve those things. And this is what I mean by being deep in process. It means you've shown up and you've kicked it off. Like, okay, no longer am I going to run away from the difficult feelings of my trauma. I'm going to look at them. I'm going to try to understand the lesson. And that kicks off what we call process. Because then it's now your task over these next few days and these experiences to systematically go through these layers. And they can be quite difficult. They can be quite challenging, right? Look at all the ways you play it small in your life. Look at all of the people you've let down. Look at how much you don't even value yourself. Like, really look and feel just how shitty of a self-image you have, right? That's very challenging. And it's called deep because it's like layers, right? You peel back layers and then another one presents itself and you work through that. And you thought that was the foundation, but it wasn't, right? It was this look that your mom gave you when you were growing up and you felt ashamed and you hid that from yourself forever, and you just go deeper and deeper. But because you've actually created the space and you have a conducive environment and you have people mirroring back the best of you, it's a process because it comes full circle. It comes full circle where you arrive back at yourself. You're always right here, right? You're always just in your direct experience, but that whole thing, that whole weight you've been carrying around, you've let go of. And that is essentially the concept of deep process.
So that was a lovely tie-up of the deep process and the reason why people come on these kinds of retreats. What gets people into trouble in the first place? Like, they learn these important life skills on the retreat, but what are some of the ways that people live, like the average person lives, as far as you can tell, that causes these issues, these types of fatigue, if you use your analogy, to begin with?
I think a big one, something I would call like a generator function, like a thing that generates a lot of these problems, is for any decision you make or any belief that you hold, did you actually come up with it? Or do you just hold it because your parents told you to, your school drilled it into you, your culture just shoved it down your throat? Because what happens is you start feeling out of alignment. You feel this dissonance within you because it's not you. You didn't reason your way there yourself. And so you feel this like inauthentic discomfort in yourself. And that just creates the whole cascade. That creates self-worth problems. That creates confusion about what you want out of life because you've never thought about it. You've only ever taken what was given to you. And that's not to say, like, if you do all the reasoning yourself and you arrive at the same answer, power to you. That's bloody amazing. The difference is that you chose it instead of it choosing you. That's a huge one. I think that's a generator for almost everything, right? You have a lot of people who come because they're trying to find some direct experience of something spiritual because they had a religion that was forced upon them that they never questioned, but then, the veneer started to crack a little bit and they got they started to doubt and question that. It's because they never chose it. Another one is we are masters at, this is actually a term I picked up from John Vervaeke, at bullshitting ourselves. Like we often say that we lie to ourselves. Like, you can't lie to yourself because like the truth.
Ah, yes.
right? You innately know the truth. Lying will not work, but you can bullshit yourself. You can tell yourself this fancy ass story that is actually not completely false and believable. Like, it's like, oh no, things are fine, right? Everything is going good, or my life is fine. Why would I have any of these problems? Right? You like bullshit yourself in all these ways, and what that does is these things don't go away. They just pile up and pile up and pile up, and then and then you see it. Everyone's walking with their shoulders hunched. They can only get energy from the 4 coffees they drink a day. Like it plays itself out into your being, this thing that just keeps piling up. And the reality is that a lot of these things, they might only take an hour, 2 hours of really focused effort to work through and process and let go of. But we never give ourselves that time or space. Like, everyone is great at filling their calendar, right? All these obligations. When's the last time you scheduled downtime? Like, time to do nothing. This again comes back, you could almost just call this something like taking care of the monkey. Like, you are an animal, you are not a machine, and there are basic levels of care that you need that we often don't give ourselves. Like, a cup of coffee is not a meal, right? And it will add up over time. Or like, 6 hours of sleep is not adequate. It's not good enough. And you can power your way through it, right? You can force yourself to do it. You can drag yourself kicking and screaming through it. But is that how you want to live? And so all these things add up. All these things we're bullshitting ourselves over, this lack of really just basic self-care, all these things add up, and then we're like, what am I doing? I don't know. Someone help me. And then society will come and they'll be like, I've got the answer. Here's the pill, here's the movie, here's something. But it doesn't have to be that way. It might just take an hour, a week, a few weeks, and you really can sort it all out yourself. It's all within your power. It's right there. But yeah, those are some really common traps that we can get into.
On the topic of bullshitting yourself, I actually read there's an essay in the form of a short book called On Bullshit, and I think that Viveki was referencing that book, that essay. It's a classic. And the argument that the philosopher of that essay puts forward is that lying requires knowledge of the truth, because you have to know the truth and then consciously divert or obstruct the truth. Bullshit is when you don't care about the truth. And you don't search for it, and you're happy not knowing, and you're happy just to bullshit yourself. And the author makes the comment that bullshit is a lot worse than lying, because in a world where everyone's bullshitting, no one has access to the truth, and no one cares. Whereas in a world full of people who either tell the truth or who lie, everyone has access to the truth. Everyone who tells a lie has to care enough about the truth to begin with, to actually obstruct it, which is a kind of a deep point. But yeah, this bullshitting where we kind of just like, I'm just going to dismiss this or rationalize this away or not look at that thing that I need to look at in my life. It's like there's one thing to look right into the problem and then to lie to yourself about it, if that's even possible. It's another thing to not look and tell yourself that you don't need to. That's bullshitting yourself, and that's clearly not a good strategy if you want to heal and like overcome the demons of your past.
Yeah, and with that explanation, which of those frames is the dominant one in most of Western culture? Like, it's quite obvious that we are masters at not looking at the thing, right? We are masters at the moment slight discomfort comes up, running away from it. Like, we are champions. We have built an entire like socioeconomic culture around that fact in itself. You feel slightly uncomfortable? I have a solution for you. I have a distraction. I have the answer. So that you never actually need to look at the thing. And this gets really sneaky in that in order for something to be meaningful to you, like truly deeply felt and meaningful, you actually have to know what it is. Like you have to know the truth of the thing. And if that thing is your life and you have no idea what the truth of it is, it's not going to be meaningful to you. And then we see this playing out right now with this huge wave of like nihilism taking over. Everyone just, life is meaningless, so let's just do stupid stuff and destroy the planet. Right? Like, it can't be meaningful to you unless you look deeply at the truth of it. And so what starts as this really small thing of like, yeah, I don't like feeling uncomfortable or sad, so I'm not going to, just snowballs into this huge thing, like literally of like your life not being meaningful and people being evil and everything just looking backwards and upside down. It's crazy. And all it took was taking a few moments of willpower and strength and fortitude of character to look at the truth.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. It's like that there's two quotes that came up for me. One of them you told me about, and it's from, I think, Sam Harris, where it's like, wisdom is the ability to follow your own advice. I love that one. And like, ask any 10-year-old, how do we live a good life? The answers are going to be like, tell the truth, share, stay true to your word, be creative. It's like, it's the stuff that it's so obvious, but yet we don't do it. Like, how good do you feel when you do that thing you've been putting off? That's like a whole other podcast that we could go into. You and I have a lot to say on that, but just like even the simple things, like just that letter, that text, that phone call, tidying up that room, you just feel better. Even if you spend a minute doing it and then you stop, you feel better for doing it for that minute. We don't follow our own advice. And then the other quote that came up for me was from Alain de Botton. I don't know the exact quote, but to paraphrase, it's something like, to measure a person's happiness, see how well they can sit alone with themselves in a room. And it's coming back to what you were talking about earlier. It's such a good sort of metric to know where you are with life. Are you impatient? Are you bored? Are you restless? I honestly think that's one of the biggest benefits of sitting meditation. People talk about it changes the brain. Yeah, okay, maybe. But, more importantly, you get used to feeling anxious, restless, bored out of your mind, and you learn to be okay with that, which is probably like the best thing you can do in today's society.
There's a whole rabbit hole of why meditation, and in a way like retreat as well, is extremely valuable. Meditation's a great one. The way I like to say it is, I'm sitting cross-legged by myself doing nothing with my eyes closed. And I can get to states of contentment, of happiness, of fulfillment, equanimity, peace of mind, self-pride, all these things. If I can do that sitting alone by myself with my eyes closed, like, what else do you need? What more do you need? Then when you open your eyes and the world comes rushing back to you, that's all a bonus. It's all just a huge bonus. But none of it was required to hit those states that all of us would tell ourselves that we want. Happiness and contentment and satisfaction. You need nothing external to get to those places. It's all in you right now. Right now. And you can get it with your eyes closed, sitting on the ground. And that is an incredibly, incredibly empowering recognition and realization, particularly if you've never had it before, right? Because we always chase the answers externally. And that's what society does. It packages up the answers and it sells it back to us. But You don't need any external authority to do that yourself. And there's a side point actually on integration again that came up for me. I got to give a shout out to the Aubrey Marcus and East Forest podcast where I heard this. They were talking about Ram Dass, and he was basically just talking about how to live, and he was like, it's very simple, it's two things: love everyone and tell the truth. And in a way, it can be boiled down just to love everyone, because if you loved everyone, you would tell them the truth. But you can also get messages like that in these experiences, whether on retreat or in ceremony or in meditation. And I'll tell you, the integration process for a message like that is very difficult. Like, tell the truth always. Like, putting that into practice is very difficult. Like, I guarantee by the time you're in the airport on the way home, you've probably told some white lie. Like, oh yeah, I'm just going here, or I'm only staying for 3 hours when you're staying for a day and a half. Like, that was the thing. That was your test right there. And so, sometimes the lessons we have to integrate and embody seem small, but they're very, very big. They're very big. And that can, like most things, drain us of motivation at times, where it's like, this is huge. Like, how do I love my partner when they're yelling viciously at me? Or how do I love that person who just cut me off in traffic and I almost had an accident? It's like, this is the process. Like, this is how you walk the path. You get the lesson and you just keep stumbling, but you keep moving forward with it.
I like Jordan Peterson. He often tells people to tell the truth, but obviously he also realizes how difficult that actually is. So he tells people to begin by first not saying things you know to be untrue. So there are all these like, part of the integration process is figuring out how you can eventually get to that ideal, and people will I think fail and be miserable if they try to hit it immediately after a retreat. So that's another part of integration. It's like, you've seen what's possible, now you have to be wise about getting there. It's not like you've seen what's possible, do or do not, fail or succeed. It's like, you've seen how amazing your life could be if you told the truth, or if you loved yourself and everyone else. But now the integration process, maybe I think you're more of an expert on integration than me, and you've taught the integration masterminds after the apotheosis retreats as well, which our listeners should know about. But for me, it would be like, okay, I got this message, this is how I would think about it, to love everyone. But I just don't. I just don't. I feel full of resentment, and these people annoy me, and then I beat myself up, and oh my god, this is so terrible, I'm a failure, oh my god, I hate myself even more, I don't love myself, this is terrible, downward spiral. I quit all of this plant medicine stuff, I'm done. But actually what you should do is go like, okay, I'm going to do one act of kindness every day, no matter how I feel, and I'm going to meditate on love every day for 10 minutes. And then in a month, I'll see how I'm doing, and then reevaluate my goals. Something like that. Would you say that's good?
This is such a common misconception, and we really don't do ourselves any service in this space, because it seems to be, no one has smacked it down as deliberately as it should be smacked down. A lot of people show up to this work with that like magic pill sense. Like, I'm just going to take this thing and it's going to solve every problem for me. All I need to do is actually just take it. And actually it's like, no, it's not like that at all. The example I love, or the analogy, is like, yeah, it shines, these experiences can shine a spotlight on a destination that you can reach. Like, you can get there. And don't get me wrong, there is incredible value in finally, maybe for the first time in your life, seeing that destination. Like, oh my god, there are people out there who will love me and be nice to me, and I can love myself, and I can show up for me and do really good work. Like, that in itself is intensely valuable. But what you have to recognize is that is a destination down the road, and you are still right here. What you have to do now is you have to walk the path. You have to walk the path that will take you to that destination. Because it does not walk you there. You don't magically get teleported to that destination. You are still right here because nothing has changed. Life is waiting for you back at home, right? But when you get home, you have this really good compass in your hand because you felt what the destination feels like, right? You felt it. You felt really good. You felt what being healthy feels like. You felt what resetting your circadian rhythm feels like. You felt what good connections with other people feel like when they come from a place of love and not like, what can you give me? You have that barometer in you now, and you can just hold that up to everything in your life. Is this moving me in the direction of that destination? Yes or no? And then just relentlessly do the things that move you in that direction. And if you do, consistently over time, to the best of your ability, you can actually get to that destination quite quickly. It is possible. It's not something always on the horizon. And then once you get there, it can both, it depends on your attitude. It can somewhat be demoralizing, or it can be incredibly motivating that once you get to that destination, the whole path still extends in front of you. And you can get a new spotlight on an even better destination and walk that path. And the further you walk, the further the path extends in front of you. And what an amazing game to play. How far can you walk the path?
Yeah, I mean, what else have you got to do? Have you got to do with your time that's better than that to get really good at that game? I want to switch to talking about your experience in Peru, but before we get into the story, the meat of that, I want to jump around a little bit because I think this is super interesting and useful for people to know about. I find your ability to handle difficult psychedelic experiences, and I know that this would also carry through to life experience as well, obviously, but the psychedelic experience can be particularly challenging. I find your perspective during psychedelic crises or spiritual emergencies, acute spiritual emergencies, I find your method of handling such incidents with equanimity to be very inspiring. Can you walk us through, from your perspective, what it feels like to start having a really difficult time on a psychedelic experience, and how you step by step become at ease with that?
Wow, yeah, that's a great question. I think there are two common ways we can start freaking out or having a difficult time in the experience. One is either being stuck or looping mentally, and the other is having very difficult physical sensation, or having no physical sensation at all, which can be a very, very harrowing experience. And I'll just set the stage and say, sure, I've had all of those. Your whole nervous system goes offline and you can't feel your body, even if you poke your arm. That's a very difficult one. You can have it where you're stuck in loops. The mental loop can be quite a difficult one, where no matter what you do, you just circular reason yourself back to the beginning. Oh, I don't feel well. Oh, my heart's beating fast. And then in thinking that, you start getting anxious and your heart's beating fast, and then you're like, oh my god, I don't feel well. My heart's beating fast. Oh my god. And then your heart keeps beating. Yeah, right. The loops are quite difficult.
You start looking for evidence why you're right as well.
Yeah. It
freaks you out more.
Epic confirmation bias, and your mind's running 1,000 miles a minute, so it can find 8,000 things, right? Yeah, they're very real. They're very real possibilities. So I just want to do some due diligence right off the bat and say, check your set and setting, right? This stuff is This stuff is not a joke, and it should be a very common term in the space. And I think to the most part it is, but like really understanding what that means. Like, if you're going to be in nature, like you have the possibility of coming across other people. Do you know that? And they'll look at you, and that might be weird, right? Like, be ready for that. Be aware of that. Do you need water? Do you like eating when you're out? Like, all these things tie in. Like, did you just have an argument in your relationship yesterday, right? Like, even basic stuff like, are you going to leave your phone on so if someone calls you, you can hear it and it's going to vibrate? All these things like really play a part, and that's just avoiding negative, right? That's not even like looking towards what would the most conducive environment actually look like. And again, this circles back into why I gravitated so heavily towards wanting to continue to do this work and give these spaces to people, because I feel like we are creating one of the most highly conducive environments. You're with experienced people who care about you in a safe space with even just like high quality material, all that stuff. Like, it's all really considered and put together. And actually I've gotten to the point in my life now where I don't do them much if it's not in a somewhat ceremonial context, even if ceremonial just means like I've created the space, I'm in my room by myself or with a single friend, with music, and I'm comfortable. Like, all that stuff, it all comes together, and it's super important. So that's just setting the stage. Let's say you do as much, and you control what you can control, and then you relax into it. And so you're halfway through, and it's really difficult. You start coming up. A very classic one, probably the classic one, is, I feel like I'm dying. Right? And this is the early onset to something like ego dissolution or ego death, where the thing that I know as me is going away, and I'm freaking out. I'm totally freaking out. There are a bunch of things you can do, and they all sound super simple, and that's the point. Because anything complicated in this state is probably too complex for you to pull off. Right? Like, you just need really simple toolkit that you can go to and use. So the first, super classic one, surrender. Not a joke. Stop trying to fight it. Even if it's very difficult, even if it's like I'm dying, just be like, okay, I accept that. I am going to die at some point in my life, right? I know that. It's a guaranteed fact. And that I've found it particularly helpful if I actually speak the words out loud rather than just repeat them in my head. Just be like, I surrender. And that can just open and do wonders for you.
Can I tell you about like an experience that I had during Apotheosis 4 during the second ceremony? Just wondering how you would have approached this if you were going through something similar. So the medicine started to take over, and it was just you're just on this ride, and in my perception everything was different. I was in a different space, and the thing that would trip me up a little bit would be that I would start to surrender. I would start to sink into this unknown, unusual, strange place where there are Icaros being sung and sensations are different, and you just feel connected, and you feel connected to these things that were invisible to you before, and it's an incredible space. It's strange, but it's incredible. But then the thing that would freak me out is that I'd have these often these little mini waking up moments where I might open my eyes and catch myself in the room and kind of remember myself, remember my situation, remember where I was, and then being kind of a bit disorientated and kind of half being in the experience of surrendering and half okay, where am I? What's going on? Is everything cool? Kind of a checking of myself, and then okay, just surrender, and then starting to surrender, and then maybe I'd feel a sensation on my leg, and then I'd be like, oh, I'm just a guy with a pair of pants. Like, I'd remember myself again, and this like this. It was never this like complete surrendering for like 3 hours in this other space. It was like a few moments of surrendering, and then like a remembering of, you know, my material condition. And I suppose if I had drank more, I would have gone deeper into that. But it was a bit strange, because I was trying to comprehend the normal reality with my sort of plant medicine state of mind, and trying to at times comprehend the plant medicine space with my ego mind. It was a bit strange.
So even right off the bat, there's nothing in that needs to be overwhelming. There's nothing in that needs to be strenuous, right? It was, oh, I'm a self, cool, right? Like it really doesn't have to be more than that. And a really nice tool as well, and we can, this can be a whole separate offshoot, but particularly the beautiful thing about something like ayahuasca is that you can ask questions and get answers back. It's something, you can have a two-way dialogue here. And often if I'm in a space where I'm not understanding why this is unfolding or why it's being difficult, ask that. What is the point of this? Why is this happening? What is the lesson? What are you trying to teach me? And more often than not, you can actually receive a response, right? You know, for something like your experience, it could be like, oh yeah, you know, you care very deeply about people, and so you keep coming out to check on them. That's a beautiful trait that I should continue doing, right? And that might have been the lesson. It might have been that this note that you're often too much in your head, right? And you're not in your body enough. So you keep, as you approach that point of like liftoff or letting go, right? You're like, oh, I feel more comfortable in my head, so I'm gonna come back there, right? And that could be the lesson as well. But you can actually ask that, and if you get an answer, that, you know, that can provide that comfort or security.
Big question. Where does that answer come from? Like, how does ayahuasca work? I know that there's no definitive answer, but I'm just curious what you think about this, because you can ask, you know, like a shaman, and they might just say that it is Mother Ayahuasca that is talking to you. It is this sacred medicine, and there are these other realms and spiritual realms, and you're getting access to those. You speak to a biologist, and they might say that it's like DMT is, you know, affecting the neurochemicals in your mind, and just you're accessing like earlier states of consciousness and mixing them with archetypal understandings of the world and the blah blah blah. So like, what are you thinking is going on during these ayahuasca ceremonies?
Oh yeah, that is the question. That is the question, isn't it? With the answers specifically, and you know, who am I dialoguing with? I kind of have two answers, and I'm not actually sure which way I lean right now. One is essentially exactly what you shared, that there is a dominant spirit or personality that you engage with, right? The spirit of the medicine. I've definitely had experiences where that really seems to be the case, where I'm dialoguing with this kind of elderly feminine archetype, and they're much like a loving grandmother giving me difficult messages, but because they care about me. You know, definitely an option. Mm-hmm. The other one that I think my kind of Western scientific mind likes a little bit more is that, you know, a couple minutes ago we were essentially saying that life is quite simple, right? The answers are quite clear, right? You want meaning, you know, work hard, have good relationships. Like, the answers really aren't that complicated, but we work ourselves through these mental mazes to be like, no, it can't be that simple. There's got to be something else. And you come up with these huge convoluted narratives that you tell yourself. But I think, you know, this is one of the common things that comes out of psychedelic science, which is it often lowers the activity of the default mode network, which is the thing that kind of holds you together. And if that whole thinking mental maze calms down a little bit, the really just pragmatic direct responses get first access, right? So it's just, you ask a question and you get this like few word, one sentence response. It's really clear, it's the exact answer that you want. And it's a very common experience for people where you can just riff off questions like at a rapid pace and just get boom, boom, boom answers. What do I do with my relationship? What should I be working on? Where should I live? And you'll just get answers immediately that you agree with, that feel really good. And honestly, you probably knew that answer the whole time, but you were just creating all these stupid mazes and excuses that were like hiding it from you. And if that whole filtering function can go offline, the answers can just come right up, like you always knew them.
Interesting. Yes, you're holding two different views, and I suppose you could say that they could be both right. Depending on what paradigm you're in at that point in time. As for my own views, one thing that's been quite incredible is since having a son, Oliver, my son is 11 months old now. I often look at him, and he reminds me of what I've been like during plant medicine ceremonies at times. I wonder what the world looks like to him, and I wonder if my mother, his grandmother, or his mother, to him, seems like Mother Ayahuasca. And we have those memories in our body, in our system, of being a newborn, being dependent on that mother figure for everything, absolutely everything. We have all of that circuitry somewhere dormant in our mind. And psychologically, I do think it's interesting, like an interesting question. What if you could regress in some way back to that newborn state, but with all of the wealth of experience and psychotechnologies and wisdom that you currently have now? What would that look like? And what comes to mind is possibly something like an ayahuasca experience for me.
Yeah, that's a motif that comes up a lot, right? You get to recapture your childlike innocence and playfulness and excitement for life and excitement for the very small things. This leaf looks awesome. Look at the ants.
Yes.
Look at the ants crawling along the ground. Ants are so badass. Like, how do they carry so much, right? All this stuff is available, but we've just been, again, you get caught up in the flow. You get caught up and bogged down with all of this stuff and these commitments and these responsibilities and these obligations and your own self-delusion, that it's just this adding of like layers of lenses that cloud your vision and your just like raw perception of existence, man. Like, it's there the whole time. And often, this is something I've come to believe more and more, like, this process isn't so much about doing more as it is about like taking away. It's a stripping away. It's a stripping away of the dogma and the obligations and all the things clouding your perception, so that you can arrive back at that rawness, that like core of you, of just, wow, I am human. Being embodied is amazing. Look at this beautiful playground I have around me. And there are other people I get to share this with? Oh my God, this is unbelievable. And everything is just like this amazing bonus. It's this like wonderful gift that like you didn't earn. You were just born and you got all of this. Like, that's amazing. And like, yeah, that's why, like, why are movies so popular right now? Like why? It gives you that little window to like explore that childlike wonder again, where you're like, holy crap, look at these worlds, and I've never seen this landscape like this before, and look at these archetypal stories like unfolding, like the hero's journey and conquering the bad guy, and like, wow, in a way, that's my life too. I have these enemies and I have these challenges, and I felt weak and small, and I can rise up. Like, it's just that these experiences are great because you get to realize that all of that stuff is in you right now. Like, you get to be the hero of this movie unfolding in front of you. Like, it's amazing. And yeah, as you do that, you reclaim that vitality and that eagerness and that unfiltered beauty that children can grasp so easily because they've never known something else. That is the default state of existence, and we just learn all these other ways.
I like what Jordan Peterson says, that when you walk down a street that you're familiar with, you don't see the street, you see your memories of the street. And I think that that's like really profound, and it's happening all the time. Like, if I asked you to draw your own mother's face, there would be so many details that you would miss, like the little bump in the nose, the little crinkle on the eye, the beauty spot under the jawbone. You'd miss all of these details, yet you see that face. You've seen that face tens and maybe hundreds of thousands of times. It's incredible how much we miss, and we just sort of see our own projection of the world as we go through it. Whereas a baby or a young child sees everything with a beginner's mind, and that beginner's mind is no surprise, is what's encouraged oftentimes by meditation masters. So the first four retreats, the first four apotheosis retreats you went on where you worked with medicine, they were interesting retreats because you were kind of working, you helped to organize them, Eric, you helped facilitate during the retreat, and of course you, the way we like to do things with High Existence is that we kind of, we fully immerse ourselves also. We don't put ourselves apart from other people. We go on the experience with everyone so that they can see that these retreats we've created first and foremost for ourselves, and that we believe in them so much that we won't ask anyone to do anything that we wouldn't do on these retreats, and I think that's really important. But the most recent retreat you went on was nothing to do with, like, nothing directly to do with work. It wasn't I know you don't call it a retreat, but for now let's just say it's a retreat. It wasn't a retreat that you organized or facilitated on. So let's start with why it isn't actually a retreat, and how this experience came about. Why did you do it, and what did it entail?
Sure. So, yeah, I'll just draw the distinction first. So, yeah, I mentioned way earlier in the conversation the distinction between the retreat and the diet. And this 3-week experience was a plant diet, or a plant dieta. And with the retreat, there's more of this unstructured atmosphere, right? There's what are you showing up to do? Where are you coming from? And then like walking alongside that process. And it can be whatever, and there's often a sense of it's a complement. There's deep work, but there's also a playfulness and community side to it. The plant diet has a very actually specific goal. You still show up with the things you want to work on, and intentions that you have bringing into it, but it's called a diet because you diet a very specific plant. You diet a medicinal plant, often native to the Amazon, and I don't want to say the goal, but the aim is to actually form a union, a deep connection with both that plant and with broader nature around you, with the jungle and with the whole atmosphere. So you have that frame already going into it. And all of the activities that are added into the schedule, or lack of activities that are added into the schedule, are done in service of that frame, to really form that union. Because just to give a little more detail on that, when a guide or a shaman sings in ceremony, they sing something called an ikaro. And what that does is it calls in a very specific spirit of a plant. And you don't come up with the Icaros per se. They're given to you. And they're given to you while you're on dieting that specific plant. So the idea is this is like a training ground where you form the connection with the plant, and the plant will give back to you in turn. So that's a little bit of the distinction. Where this came up for me was just, again, like I said, these have been the most powerful experiences and important experiences of my life. Not even just for myself, but for like the work I want to do and what I view like what the world needs and the gift that I can give to the world. And so again, I mentioned this very hungry like student mentality, this like willingness to be a disciple of this path. And it just came up that like a next step to really increase your capacity, really increase your ability to be of service in these experiences, was to go on a diet. And so I went, right? Like the path was indicated and I kept walking it. You know, with the end goal being that I can then take the gifts that I got and bring them back into the experiences that we run, whether that's through better facilitation, whether that's through deeper insight into how to tease out individuals' process and help them with that. Or again, you know, the more that you can show up in life, that's a gift in itself too.
What I didn't know much about the specific plant work relating to the tea, and like, can you give us some context as to how this went down? So like, how did you arrive and what happened when you arrived? Like, what kind of plant did they choose for you? Did you have any say in it? Why did they choose it? That kind of thing. I'm just trying to picture it.
Sure. So we're driving down a 2-lane road, kind of the only road in Iquitos, Peru, and we just unload on the side of the road and we just start walking straight away from the road deep into the jungle. We probably walked for 45 minutes just straight into the jungle. Just
no
on these
paths?
It started as a kind of red clay hiking path, you know, single file, and then it just became this single plank of wood that rested on stilts like a meter off of the jungle floor, and you would just walk along this single plank for like 20 minutes because underneath was just marsh and bog and rivers and jungle foliage.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was an experience in itself. But
so you could fall off that plank quite easily.
Yeah, like it was sturdy. Sure, it was well constructed, but like you're on like a single plank of wood just walking along. It was quite funny. And eventually we just look to our right and there's these doors. We walk into the doors and there's just this whole oasis like carved this deep into the jungle. And it's got our individual huts or tambos. It's got the maloka, the ceremony space. It's got a dining area and it's got a kitchen. And that was our little playground for the next 3 weeks. And so we all have individual huts. This was a very, very isolated process. And it had a bed, a desk, a chair, and a manual flush toilet, where if you wanted to flush the toilet, you would scoop a bucket of water and you'd pour it right into the bowl. And that was it. And so you had your clothes, maybe a notebook, and that's what you had. So
How close were you to like other animals, to nature? And was your hut safe from, you know, other kind of like snakes and things like that?
Yeah, so they do everything's been really considered there. It's well thought out. So you are walking through like dense jungle, but when you come to the space, they've cut down the grass, so it actually looks almost like a mowed lawn, like the actual area that you would walk on. All the buildings are built on stilts, and all the wood that supports the stilts has been charred, and this material wrapped around the base, all in the service of just preventing bugs and stuff from climbing up. You had mosquito netting around the hut, and you had a mosquito net over your bed, so it was quite comfortable. And actually, they even had they would have security at night, like with these big ass, like single gauge shotguns, just
Really?
sitting there in case anything would come at night.
Like what?
Like anything. Actually, I think their main concern was actually like other people who might come and try to take like your wallet or something, because again, it is Peru, and if you could get $100 from a Westerner in US dollars, like that's several months' salary. So I think that was the concern. But it was the same jungle that there would be like panthers. You could have some big snakes, just some venomous, not nice things. So there was a general concern, but there wasn't any single issue. And they've been open for like 10 years, and I don't think they've ever had any problem. But so that's the space you're at. One thing that I really liked is the two women who we brought to our latest retreat to run ceremonies. They were also there, and they were the ones bringing our group. And what I really appreciated is they actually do a brilliant job, in my opinion, of merging this kind of Amazonian shamanism with kind of Western psychotherapy. So, we would talk about where we're showing up at. We would talk about our experiences after ceremony each night, and really start digging into the problems and the root causes and the generator functions, which isn't something that commonly occurs if it was just a more traditional unfolding. You'd show up for ceremony, but then you'd be by yourself the rest of the time. So I really, really appreciated that. But really, the way the diet unfolds is there are 3 common ways a diet plant can be consumed, either in a tea, like a brewed tea, hot tea, an extract, so a much more concentrated, kind of like an oil that you'd get, or that can even be concentrated further into a paste, all of these being more potent than the last. So we just got these big 2-liter thermoses of tea. Hot tea in the jungle became its own ordeal to go through. It was pretty funny. But so we paired it with, we had a much, much more reduced food intake. And you have the classic kind of diet that comes before doing ceremony, right? No meat, no salt, no sugar, no processed food. Right, so we're eating very basic, very small meals. And we're supposed to drink like 5 or 6 liters of this tea a day. And over time,
Wow.
that helps you form the connection, right? The plant itself was called ahosacha. It's often referred to as jungle garlic. It has a kind of garlicky taste to it. The reason it was selected was it's a very common beginner diet plant. Like if you are starting this process, this is often the first one that you'll start with.
Why is it a common beginner plant though, and like what would make an advanced plant?
So it's a common beginner plant because it's easy enough to ingest large volumes of. It's very cleansing. It dumps out a lot of bad fat and really cleans your system out. And with a lot of this introductory work, that's a very important step, right? You really want your vessel to be as clean as possible so that you really just want to reduce any friction so that you can really turn inward and notice the signals coming from you. You don't want your body to be having to digest a lot of food. You don't want it to have to be processing fat. Like, you just want to be really clean. And so this is a great starting place for that. And as to what makes a difficult plant, this is also a beginner because you can stomach it. It makes you a little nauseous. It gives you quite weird dreams, but it's all quite manageable. Now, to your point of what would make a more advanced one is, there are some that you can do. Maybe you have a tea or an extract where it can just induce purging or vomiting for several hours straight. And if you haven't built up to that, both physically or like energetically, that can be harmful. Not even like neutral. It can be harmful. You can do yourself harm if you're actually unloading for that long over continued days. So you just have to build your way up to these things, right? Like anything, you don't go to the gym and you just try to squat like 200 pounds right off the bat. Like, no, you progress, right? You have to build up the capacity to do that. And the same thing applies to a diet. You start where you start as a beginner, and you build up the capacity to handle some of the bigger plans.
That's a great answer. So, what was like the not the ceremonies themselves, but what was like the average day outside of ceremony like for you? What kind of thoughts were you having? How were you feeling? What were you doing to occupy the time?
Yeah, so really, we had all the days, all that time to ourselves, right? On non-ceremony days, you would get meals brought to your hut. So, and you weren't really supposed to engage with the other members of the group. You're supposed to let them do their own process.
What were you eating, by the way?
A pretty consistent breakfast was just this single bowl of soup, kind of like a broth and maybe an egg or two, with some basic like lettuce, but just a single bowl. Lunch and dinner would be some variation of either white rice, plain quinoa, a basic salad, and some beans. All just very plain, no salt, no sugar, so no fruit either, right? Just really, really basic stuff, really just enough to kind of sustain you. So I'll describe a day where I had like no commitments, right? So your body adjusts really fast, right? Your circadian rhythm like really gets its shit together quite quickly. So you're often rising with the sun, which is like 6:30 in the morning, and we would bathe in the river. There was a river that ran through the property, so it was beautiful. You wake up, you get your tea refilled, you go jump in the river, brush your teeth or whatever. It was stunning. Really calm atmosphere to the jungle when the day is, because most of these creatures end up being nocturnal because it's just so damn hot at times. And it was really up to you from there. Really, for me, it was just it was this continued cycle of noticing what was coming up, because none of it was coming up by accident, right? So I might be like sitting on my stairs of my hut, and I'll be distracted by like an intrusive thought of thinking about my family back at home. Like, oh man, I should probably be a better son. I should communicate more. And it's super easy in our day-to-day lives, like back at home, to just dismiss that. Be like, whatever, I don't want to think about that. Or just check your phone, right? Hop onto Instagram and start scrolling so you even miss it. You don't even notice it. But after like 4 days here, right, your whole mind and your body calm down completely, that whenever something does choose to surface, there's a reason for it. And so if you're paying attention, you can latch on and start digging into it. And so I would just go into this cycle of kind of occupying time. I read a lot, so just reading books. We would also...
What did you read?
Oh God, I read a bunch on Stoicism. I read the classic two staples. I read the Handbook and Discourses by Epictetus. I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And they just had this like donated library there, so people would come and they'd leave a book when they left. Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, great story. Read a handful of books kind of on the unfolding of this space, like ayahuasca tourism, the meeting of shamanism and Western psychotherapy. Just really what was there that seemed interesting. And so you'd be reading, right? And then again, something would just make itself known. And when you're having like very few and far between thoughts, like it's like an alarm. It's like, oh, okay, now I'm being distracted about work and I want to go work, and like, what does that mean? And so I'd just go to my desk, I'd open my notebook, and I'd start writing about it, and like seeing what comes up. I would write about like where do you draw the line between science and mysticism in the psychedelic space, because that was coming up, and I just riff on that, and I ended up just taking dozens and dozens of pages. Like I told you earlier, I'm also going to be like releasing my notes from this whole thing, and it ended up being like an 100-page document, just with every day and every ceremony outlined. It was a really beautiful process, but it was amazing because, again, you have nothing to do, like nothing at all. And it would get dark at 6 p.m. Alright, so you had 12 hours of light, and you have no electricity. You have a candle, and that's it. And so if you wanted to stay up past 7:30, like you'd probably be writing or reading. And so it was just this cycle of noticing what's coming up and trying to dig into it. Like, why is this still bothering me? I know that there's nothing I can do right now, so what is trying to come up? And then there was this beautiful like 1-2 punch where, you do the intellectual work here, right? You try to like dig into the lesson and stuff in your notebooks, or you just sit with it and see what's coming up. And then, we did ceremonies Monday, Wednesday, and Friday every week. So within like 24 hours, you'd have the opportunity to go in a ceremony, and almost without fail, whatever the thing that was bothering me early on and introducing itself would come up and be processed and then let go of. And it was this cycle just repeated week over week. It was really beautiful.
How did your reading of Stoicism alter your feelings and thoughts on the retreat itself? I'm just curious what you thought of the discourses as well.
The discourses were stunning. I actually liked, because I was reading just the books in sittings, like reading dozens of pages at a time, I actually liked the handbook and the discourses more than meditations. Meditations, I feel like it's suited to just like pick up every so often and read a line or two and get that reminder. But to read it all at once, it was kind of just a lot of repetition, which is almost the point, right? It's this continual reminder of these themes. But I was like, okay, I don't want to keep reading the same things hours and hours a day. But there's very little that I've found right now that I think is better suited for being a human and like picking a mode of being and a way of relating to the world than Stoicism. Like, if you are a human, you should dive into this work, because it's so basic. And again, we've already spoken twice about, life is not that complicated, right? The answers are often very simple, but we delude ourselves into thinking otherwise. And Stoicism just relentlessly cuts that into you. It's like, focus on the things that you can control and be indifferent to everything else. And that's immediately applicable, right? Where it's like, okay, I'll be sitting, just killing some time, and this thought from my past comes up of like bullies or something in high school. And you immediately have this frame of reference that you can use to dissect it, where it's like, did I do something to do that? No. Okay, that was someone else's actions. Okay, so I don't have control over that. Okay, so why should I care? I conducted myself as I should have in the way that I could control, and that's enough. Or you just get the common like stoic armor when you're in ceremony. And this is actually would be another answer as to like, how do you deal with difficult times? It's like, this too shall pass. Like, you will survive. Nothing can harm you. That was the biggest one by far, because I had some incredibly physically demanding experiences in ceremony, like just a lot of purging, a lot of being extremely drained. But there was always this recognition that I could just like pop back and just witness it instead of like suffering through it. Just notice like, oh, okay, this thing is happening. And if you can embody that and carry that through the rest of your life, that is an immensely powerful tool. That is like the single most powerful tool. Where if you're in pain, if you have chronic pain, if you have any form of disease, or if just something unpleasant happens, like just watch it. Period. You don't have to get involved. You don't have to let it bother you. This is one of the like ringing repetitions of Epictetus. Like, you choose to let things bother you, and at any moment you can choose to not let it bother you. And immediately you can feel in yourself you're trying to come up with a case where that's not true. Like, yeah, but what if my girlfriend like slaps me, or like what if my parents kick me out and leave me on the street? Like, no. You always choose to suffer through something. And at any moment you can let go. And again, to carry that into something like ceremony is an incredibly useful tool. So yeah, reading that in the context of going through these experiences day in and day out, it was just this immensely useful frame to keep coming back to.
It's amazing. You're right with Epictetus's work. He keeps reminding you that when you get insulted, you are choosing to be harmed. You know, it's the insult itself wasn't harmful. When something quote unquote bad happens, you are choosing to let it bother you in some way, and it's so difficult to think like this. But Epictetus is operating in a completely different paradigm. You can't, on one hand, like seek wealth and fame and this like state of happiness in the future, and at the same time consider yourself a stoic, or even consider yourself to have the credibility to criticize stoicism. You're in a different paradigm. Epictetus is saying, look, there's another way of being, and in this other way of being, these are the rules. You can take the leap if you want, but you can't practice the dichotomy of control and also seek fame and wealth and all these kind of like ordinary human materialistic desires. One thing I love about Epictetus, he says that when you learn to read and write, you don't resist that process. You don't say, oh, I'm gonna actually spell this word my own way. Right? Like, nobody does that. Nobody's like, screw this language stuff. I'm gonna spell this word however I like, and you kind of misspell it. You actually learn to enjoy spelling a word the way it's meant to be spelled. In other words, you learn to want things to be the way they are. And this is another key part of Stoicism, is this like, if you're going to be complaining about stuff, then unfortunately you are a fool. There's no way around it. You are a fool because you're wanting something to be different from how it is. You're wanting a word to be spelled differently than how it is. A better strategy is to learn the word and learn to enjoy spelling it correctly. A better strategy is to learn to want life to be the way that life is. And then you are pretty much invincible. And it's like, it's so confronting for people to hear that. And yeah, I can imagine that's very, very powerful on any kind of dieta or experience where you're working with plant medicine. Going back, you were talking about surrender, and you also said, this too shall pass. Were there any other strategies that helped you get kind of like outside of your head and be the witness? I know you've done Sam Harris's Waking Up meditation app. Did that help you in this process too? It sounds like it might have.
I think there's certainly value that I got from having experience in meditation overall, right? The ability to kind of sit, take a step back, and watch the traffic go past you instead of jumping in the car and getting driven off with it. Again, it's an incredibly valuable tool that is extremely still underrated. It's growing and taking a hold in the West, but still under the frame of like maximizing output instead of just maximizing quality of being and quality of life. One of the things that became quite helpful was actually isolating myself even further. Part of why I wanted to go on this was that I would be completely isolated. I wanted to see the person who would come up when I didn't have to be a person for anyone else. Right? So that isolation was important. But then when we were in ceremony, and ceremony comes with this like sacred vow of silence, right? This deep, like eternal silence that I've only ever experienced in ceremony, where so many people are so quiet. It is stunning. It is really beautiful. But there were times when I actually needed more involvement to work through what was coming up. So I would actually isolate myself further by going into the washroom, right? There are a number of washroom stalls, and I would just hang out there for a bit, because that allowed me to move around a little bit more. It allowed me to make a bit of noise, just like talk or cry or whatever was coming up. And that increased range of expression was really helpful. So then I could sit back and let the thing unfold as it wanted to, instead of feeling like I still needed to be extremely present to filter myself so that I wasn't moving, that I wasn't bothering the other people, that I wasn't making noise. And it actually helped me to even check out even further when I knew that I just had that little range of motion and expression that so it could, the process could work however it wanted to work.
I think we have a lot of stuff to go into still about your own personal process on the ceremony nights. I love hearing about how you noticed that you needed your own space, and you went into that even more deeply. For many people, that is quite a scary thing, actually, to like seek that level of solitude when deep in process. It's on some level ungrounding not to be around people. It's obviously not nice to be around people who are doing strange things and making a lot of noise, but to be apart from the group and to be away from the shamans can be quite ungrounding, I think. But you felt that you needed to do that, and so you did that. How did you see? So when I went on the Rhythmia retreat, the first intention they gave us was they had group intentions on the wall. They recommended that before we could do any kind of healing or soul work, we had to first see what we were, shadow work. We had to see what we've become, see the lies and the bullshit that we've been telling ourselves. So I'd love to hear what kind of potentially difficult things you saw about yourself that you were like, oh, okay, yeah, that's an issue. I don't like that. That needs to change. What was that experience like? How did you see yourself more clearly during these ceremonies?
Yeah, and I just want to give a shout out, actually, for all of these experiences and all of the integration in between all of them. Easily the highest leverage work I've done is shadow work. Like, by and large, it's incredibly powerful, particularly when we're raised in a culture that doesn't want to look at anything bad at all. And to have to sit and really examine, and more importantly, feel all those parts of yourself that you've rejected is very difficult. But there's this huge wave of like unity that washes over you after you feel whole, because you've finally acknowledged an entire part of yourself that you've been unwilling to feel for so long. So there were quite a few of these instances that came up. One recognition that took some time to work through was this recognition that, you know, no one can ever take you away from you. And what I mean by that is, we often filter who we are and what we say because we feel that people will reject it or not like it, and therefore that would invalidate us. But that can never happen. No one can invalidate you. Like, you are a human, you are beautiful. Opinions don't matter, right? Like, no one can ever take you away from you, but you can take yourself away from everyone else by not speaking your truth, by not being authentic to who you are, by just not sharing and not opening up. Like, you actually take yourself away from everyone else. And that's terrible, because you also take away the opportunity for people to really embrace you as you are. And that actually can build a lot of resentment in relationships. Like, if you never show your partner who you truly are, there's no amount of love they can give you that will ever matter, because they're not loving you, because you haven't given it to them, right? And then you get in these petty arguments of like, no, you don't actually love me. Well, it's your fault. You never gave yourself to them. And so that clicked in one of the ceremonies. Both, no one can ever take you away from you, which was very empowering. That was very beautiful. Because I, like anyone else, you know, want validation, appreciate friendships, all that good stuff. But to know that I can do that from a place now where I'll never be invalidated, because I'm the only one who can invalidate me, right? This goes essentially back to Stoicism as well, right? I'm the only one who can choose that. Very empowering. But with that came the flip side. And with a lot of these experiences, particularly if someone's never done it, the words only go so far, because the words are intellectual. What really matters is that you feel it. That you feel it in every fiber of your being and deep within your bones. And so I had to sit and feel the pain of just never showing up for anyone in my life. Withholding my life story from my parents. Not being authentic to my friends. And only like talking about the stuff that they want to talk about, because I just assumed that they didn't want to hear the true me. Again, the way I've kept myself from partners and intimate relationships. And you just go through, like, systematically, relationship by relationship, and also like in work and in the way I would show up in my offices and with the team and with this team too, and just feeling like, oh my God, like, I have taken this gift away from everyone because I was scared and acting from a place of fear and acting from a place of ego. Like, how selfish and how silly. And to feel that in just these cascading waves as every relationship was brought up and mirrored back how I was doing that, very difficult. Very difficult to sit and own that and be like, holy shit, yeah, like, for years, for years I've been doing this. And all the instances, the individual times that has happened, like, damn. And, you know, that is also the value of this experience, right? You have nowhere else to go. Like, you're along for the ride now. And so you just sit and watch and feel and release. And, like, you cry and you get angry and you get scared and it just comes out. But it comes out, right? And you've processed it. And so now you can take that, you know, that was a big integration lesson for me. And it's been something I've been trying to do the past few weeks as I've been home, is like, speak your truth and reciprocate in your relationships. That was definitely one. I had another one that was both very impressive and very difficult to go through. You know, it's cool. We talked about the witness participant difference. it's cool because when you take the participant frame, it sucks and it's really difficult and it hurts and it's hard. But when you witness it, you're like, wow, this process is unbelievable. Like, the fact that this is actually happening is amazing. But so I had one.
That's so
like,
cool.
And
That's
both
so
of that
cool
happens
you
at the
can
same
switch.
time. Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow.
And you get to like choose the frame. You're like, okay, I want to be in it for a couple minutes, and then no, I just want to watch because it's getting hard. That was a really cool like thing to be able to do. But there was one that came up very just specifically about pain. And more importantly, a very big part of shadow work is how much pain you can cause. Like Jordan Peterson talks about this endlessly. Like one of his rules in don't let your kids do anything that makes you upset with them, because you are a monster. You are a monster and you do not want them on your bad side. So I had this just come up again in these growing circles of individuals. So I had one of like all the pain I caused my relationship and what they must be feeling right now. All the pain I've caused my parents from, again, not being true or just doing stupid stuff. All the pain I've caused other people just by being mean or petty or manipulative or whatever. Also, all the pain that I've shielded other people from, thinking that I could be some hero for them. And like, and again, this is feeling it. This is like your bones are hurting and like your stomach is clenched and it's just this deep like, oh my god, this is terrible. But what was fascinating about this is that it kept stepping up levels. So then I had this whole grieving process for all the people in all the cities who are so isolated when they're surrounded by millions of people, but they feel so alone, and just how terrible that is. Because I felt it too. I felt alone for a lot of my life, and feeling that, and then feeling all the pain of how much we're destroying the planet, and like feeling it like, oh my god, this is unbelievable. And just like feeling the pain of just all the collective garbage of humanity, all of the wars and the manipulation and the torture and the mental torture and the mind games we play with people. And it just kept going up levels and levels of abstraction. And like, yeah, it was just this like grieving process, just this like feel it all so you can let it go and it doesn't have to hold you down any longer. But and I tie this in with shadow work, because whether anyone listening to this likes it or not, like, you have within you the capacity to do anything any human has ever done. That
Yeah.
right? You can be Mother Teresa and you can be Adolf Hitler. It's whether you choose to express it or not. But to deny the fact that you have that capability is actually just incorrect. Because they were a human, you're a human, it's human nature, you can mold it, right? And so it was just this recognition of like, holy crap, like I can cause all this pain. And so I had to feel it all to get to the point where it was like, okay, now I can choose. That is like your sacred power. Like, you get to choose whether you enact that or not. And it's much more stronger, or I believe it's much stronger when it comes from that, I know how this feels and I will not do that to anyone. Again, rather than
boundary is being put up.
Yeah. Or it's like lying. Like, everyone intellectually can give you 1,000 reasons why you never need to lie. Even white lies, right? Like, people will respect you more if you tell them the truth. Boom. You never have to tell your girlfriend that dress doesn't make her look fat, right? Like, you can always speak the truth. And yet, none of us do. We always lie. All the time, right? Like, if you could feel and go through the process of what it is like to be deeply manipulated and have every person in your life not feel like they can tell you the truth, it will be much easier for you to just speak the truth all the time. So a lot of these experiences were this embodied feeling of just really viscerally experiencing what that's like, so that you can feel intuitively what you know intellectually. And that combination, I think, creates that grounding, that to your statement, like that boundary of like, this is a hard line now. This isn't just some mental weak line. This is a hard line, and I'm not going to cross it anymore.
I love this point you bring up about like you could be Mother Teresa or Adolf Hitler, because I've thought for a long time that the thing that I'd like to see you work more on is this monster inside you, because I've seen such a agreeable, sweet, compassionate, present person, which is amazing for me. Like, I'm not complaining. Amazing for the people in the team, but for you, developing that inner monster is going to be, it's going to feel great on some level. Not to express it, but to recognize that it's there. And it sounds like you've really done that. Just something I wanted to add onto this point of like people who deny that they have this shadow inside them, and that ultimately it's a choice. Well, first of all, if you weren't capable of great evil, then how could you ever think of yourself as capable of great good? You know, it's because you don't do those bad things that you are good. Right, so like you can't have it both ways. You can't say like I'm a good person. It's like, why are you a good person? Because you don't do those bad things. Yeah, okay then. Right, so you know it's possible that you could do those things then. Possible, but you choose not to. Yes. So if you follow it through like logically, then it's you're good because you don't do those things that are potentially tempting on some level, that are, you know, might give you some short-term reward. But you'd rather have a good character and be a good member of society. The other thing as well is that people often group others, like people who've gone to jail, as like those criminals out there, those people who have broken the law out there. But I'm not so sure that a lot of people listening to this, and a lot of people in our streets, in our societies, don't have exactly the same thoughts and drives as criminals, but they're just not stupid enough to take the chance getting caught. And the moment you give the average person a bit of power, you'll often see a lot of corruption coming in. When you know you can get away with stuff, it is scary how corrupt human beings can get. And the moment you truly realize this, then you start treating life and power and powerful energies like wealth and sex and fame and popularity and status with a lot of care. Just want to add that.
You know, there's a funny point of, you know, the majority of people in jail are there for petty drug crimes, right? Mm-hmm. Like a gram of weed or something. And like, if we're being honest, like, no, you just haven't gotten caught. That's the only thing that separates you from being one of those guys. Like, let's be real, you were just in the suburbs instead of the inner city, and that was it. Like it's the same thing. And so to paint everyone with these broad brushstrokes does a disservice to literally everyone. And yeah, you know, that's how these things, when you don't have that hard line, the yardstick can get pushed so easily. Right, that's how things like the big Enron scandals and all this white collar stuff happens. It happens small, and then you're like, cool, got away from that, or got away with that. That's now the baseline of what I know is possible. Let's push it a little further, and eventually you're just doing ridiculous stuff because, like, hey, it hasn't backfired yet.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you know, just giving a little space to actually even the concept of the shadow and shadow work overall. Like, not to go too deep, but, you know, the shadow is anything that you refuse to look at in yourself or that you push away. And there are really common things that come up, really common ones. Aggression is a big one. Envy is a huge one. Those often go in your shadow quite quickly. But they're valuable. They're valuable tools that you can use, right? Like, okay, so you're talking with one of the classic like love and light LA spirituality folks where everything, or like the hippie movement. This was the problem with the hippie movement entirely, right? That they only took one half and rejected anything dark. And it's like, no, you're rejecting half of human nature, guys. Like, you can't just throw that out. But so someone's like, no, there's never a reason to be aggressive. And it's like, if someone barged in your door right now and started beating you half to death, like, are you still just gonna be like, no, non-violence is the answer? Like, no, it's deeply sewn into your genetic code. Like, you're gonna jump up and you're gonna be aggressive, right? So there are use cases for it. Again, this stuff always comes back to, can you discern and be wise about the right use of that? You know, aggression is also standing up for yourself. And that was your point. Like, you were the one who many times said, like, do some more shadow work. Like, I want to see the aggression. I want to see the warrior archetype expressed more in you. Because, yeah, like, I would let people kind of walk on me a little bit, even if I knew that that's what they were doing. And this is actually something that came up in ceremony as well. And this was a really, really sneaky, like, deep layer that came up, where I actually did that because it was this deep ego thing of, I am stronger than you. Because why would you need to walk on me if you're strong? You're obviously not, and I am, so I'll let it happen. It's cool, I can take it. You clearly can't. And it was this crazy, like,
That's
it was this crazy, like, oh my god, I think I'm literally better than everyone. And to the extent that I'll let them, like, walk on me, like, are you serious? And again, having to sit with that and own it sucked, because you get shown all the times that's happened, and just that crazy inflation of the ego where it's like, dude, do you really think you're fucking better than everyone? Like, no, you're not. So you gotta get smacked down with the humble stick a little bit too, but it took a lot of digging to get to that point where it was like, why don't I stand up for myself? Like, you know, the first layer, easily just like self-worth, like, okay, I don't think I'm worthy, so like, why would I stand up for myself? Like, that's dumb. You know, then there was the layer of like, well, at least it's attention. At least people are paying attention to me. Negative attention is better than no attention. This is often why children can act out, right, if their parents are absent, because at least you're paying attention, right? And so you dig into those, you resolve those, you process them, you release them. And then it was like, yeah, holy crap, I think I'm stronger than everyone. And like, you're just going layer and layer lower. But then you're like, okay, I don't want this. I care about myself. I shouldn't let this thing happen to me. What do? Well, you do the shadow work. You build your aggression. You recognize that there is a point to be firmly spoken and to stand your ground, and you begin to walk that path. You begin to actually practice that in your life.
Yeah, and you know my thoughts on this. Martial arts, I think, is a very good practice for, not for cultivating aggression, but for testing the limits of body movements that simulate what you might do in an aggressive or dangerous situation, so that you could really like trust yourself to be able to handle these situations. And yeah, so I'm a big fan of that. And also reading books on historic atrocities and seeing yourself as the perpetrator in those books. Yeah, I think that's actually a very deep spiritual practice. I'm just going to give you guys listening this practice to do. Find a story anywhere about a victim and a perpetrator. Ideally, the crime is quite severe, like a rape, severe abuse, a murder, something quite severe, and relate 100% to the victim and empathize 100% with the victim, and then relate and empathize 100% with the perpetrator of the crime, and see yourself as both people, because both of those are in you. That's a very deep spiritual practice, but it's quite difficult, so work up to it if you think that's too daunting.
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I'd love to riff on an example because it's. I'll try to find the video to see if we can put it in the show notes, but Jordan Peterson talks about this as well, just because it ties so nicely into standing your ground and the aggression point we brought up. So, most people in a group of friends, when they're deciding where to go to dinner, and the group wants something and they want something else, they can't stand their ground on that. Right? They won't
Mm-hmm.
they won't be like, "No, I don't want to do this." Right? The collective wants to do it. Cool. So, something small like that, just a single meal with friends, you're still not able to stand up and say no. Everyone suddenly thinks that they would be the lone person in Nazi Germany being like, "No, this is wrong." Can you imagine an entire country focused on the betterment of themselves, the survival of their people, and they're doing something that they believe goes to that end? And you're just like, could you actually say, "Oh no, guys, we can't do that"? No, Peterson actually puts forward, and I think it's on the on the button, like exactly
Mm-hmm.
correct. Just like, not only would you participate in it, you would try your hardest to get promoted, right? Because what do people do now? They try to climb to the top of the hierarchy in what our society values, right? Fame, money, wealth, status. Like, that's how you would do it back then, right? If the whole country is rallied around this thing, not only would you do it because you can't even not go to dinner, right? You would do it, and you would try to do it as well as possible because you would want everyone to give you that status and validation and stuff. And it's easy to sit and say it like that, but yeah, to your challenge, like, make some time for yourself and feel it. Feel it. Like, go through the motions and actually, like, come to terms with that. Because it's in you. It's in you. And denying it isn't really useful.
Yeah, I love Breaking Bad. The TV show Breaking Bad is a classic example of the shadow. And if you could have been best friends with Walter White, who's the protagonist in Breaking Bad, for 20 years, and think you knew him, and been best friends with him, and had barbecues with him, and thought that he was a great guy, you did not realize that he was a drug lord also. Like, waiting to happen, a potential drug lord. And if Walter White's character had found some other venture, who knows what else he could have been. And we've all got these potentials within us, and the circumstances, unusual circumstances, and other people can unlock those within us. And if you want to be a wise, useful person on earth, you've got to recognize that you're not some fixed personality who's just like purely good. No, you need to actually like do things to maintain your goodness. There's a reason why the Dalai Lama still to this day meditates on compassion for 4 hours a day. Because he's recognizing that, like, I still got work to do. I got to maintain this love. If I don't, I could be, not nice, not loving, and I wouldn't be able to follow through with my responsibilities to help mankind. So anyway, Eric, I want to go back to the Dieta experience. We've covered some of the realizations that you had. We've talked a little bit about the processes you've used to stay calm in difficult, challenging experiences. I want to go back to the women you talked about earlier, the two women. We won't mention their names, but you said they combined shamanism with psychotherapy. I'd love to hear like a story or two about what it was like seeing these women. What were they like, and how did they help other people on their journey?
It was stunning. It was really stunning, really impressive, and to me it was just this shining signal of what walking very far down the path looks like. I joked with them at one point. I was like, it seems like you only have two different states that you operate in: extremely composed and extremely content. Because, like, that's it. They're either solid like a rock unwavering, or they're laughing and having an amazing time. And like, yeah, they said when they're on their own that, of course, like any human, difficult things come up and they get frustrated and whatever, but the intense grace and poise that they had from doing this work for so long was extremely inspiring, extremely motivating. Yeah, and so a way I'll try to paint an example of what this looks like. It was rooted, a lot of what they do is rooted in this idea that any disease or dis-ease arises, and this can be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. There's really not much of a difference. Arises from an unexpected conflict in your life where you felt alone. And it's this big shock that catches you way off guard. And so your body like stores onto this and uses it as a warning beacon in the future, where if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, it like raises the alarm so that you don't do it. Or it changes your behavior on a day-to-day basis, or your physical makeup on a day-to-day basis, to try to avoid or just even signal that there's something still unresolved in you. Two examples I can give to make that actually tangible. One is allergies. So let's say you're out on a walk with your parents, you're a kid, and you're in a field and there are dandelions, right? And your dad gets super pissed at you and like yells at you in front of other people, and you feel super ashamed and super embarrassed. It's your body's job to protect you. So your body ties that warning signal to an environmental cue, dandelions. So now you're growing up, and you haven't processed this. It was highly traumatic, and your body's like, oh my god, I gotta protect them from that again because it's no bueno. Right? So now you find yourself in a field and there are dandelions, and you start reacting. Your warning mechanism is going off, like just blaring itself to you. And it's a sign that there's conflict to be processed. And if you can process it and prove to your body and your psyche that that situation isn't going to happen again, and you learn the lesson, it has no need to continue to flash the warning sign for you, so it goes away. Another example would be, there was a woman with us who had a very difficult childhood, very traumatic experiences with their family growing up, felt very alone. So the body feels like it was incredibly alone. And so it was like, I gotta take care of me. I need to store all the resources that I want. And so she held on to a lot of water weight, right? And you could see it, right? You could hold. She was holding on because, at any moment she might be alone. And she echoed this in her own behavior and her attitudes, right? I feel very alone. Even in my marriage, I feel alone. I feel alone with my children, right? So it like that left a lasting scar. And it actually took digging from these two women to get to that point, because the surface discussion when she was sharing was something like, yeah, I'm not connecting well with my husband and I might file for divorce, and I don't know, I'm kind of not happy. And out of nowhere, like just like a laser, one of these women was just like, do you feel alone? And she was like, yeah, all the time. She was like, that's why your marriage is failing, right? Because you're not connected to any of them. And you can't be, because you have this thing still unresolved. And I kid you not, as the weeks unfolded, and keep in mind that we're drinking like 5 liters of this highly cleansing tea that burns off bad fat, between those discussions where it's just like this laser point into root cause generator functions, and really piecing through that, like, this wasn't your fault, it wasn't in your control, and a whole lot of other stuff that she would share, Like, you could actually see her get thinner and thinner and thinner. It was like, okay, the resolution to the conflict is coming, the self-narrative is changing, she feels safe and trusted, and therefore all the healing is taking place. Right? Like, some of this can get kind of esoteric, but like you don't have to think of how to heal your arm when you break it. You just put it in a cast and your body does the thing. Right? If you get paper cuts, your body heals it. Like, your body knows what it needs to do. Period. You just have to give it the space, time, and energy to let it do its thing. And if we never do that, it never gets better. But if we can withdraw ourselves, if we can literally retreat from our life and come into these spaces where we now give it everything that it needs, we bring it into conscious awareness, we process it, we don't fill our body with crap, only good stuff, right? The healing process just unfolds. And it was, there were 7 of us and these 2 women on this experience, and just one by one they would go in with these katanas of just cutting to the core of what the root issues were and what you wanted to work on. And it was this 1-2 punch of, you'd process it in our discussion, you'd get the next step, like the next thing you want to work on, and then you would have an entire ceremony or 2 or 3 or 4 to really work on it and process it. And the reason I said I liked the way they do this is that whole discussion side of things isn't traditional. That's not actively practiced. That's actually coming from the Western world. This complement of essentially like talk therapy and like even like CBT, like noticing cognitive biases and all this stuff. Like, that doesn't exist in the traditional world. But now that I've had this experience where both are paired, I really wouldn't want it any other way, because it's so immensely powerful and it accelerates the process and at an immense rate. Like, the speed of the work you can do is so much more rapid because you have this complementary back and forth of intellectually understanding what is going on and how you're deluding yourself and what the next step is, and then getting into the embodied processing and release of it. And the cycle just continues for 3 weeks, and it was immense and deeply impressive.
When you were doing the dieta in Peru, I want to hear some like interesting stories. So can you tell me like what was like the weirdest moment that you experienced out there? Like, what was the most bizarre thing that you were like, oh my god, what is going on right now? Could be like a ceremonial experience, could be a conversation, or just something you saw.
Wow, so yeah, there are probably two, maybe 3 that came up that struck me as profoundly strange. One was very simple and very mundane, but it was alarming in many ways. So I was sitting on my balcony, or like just outside of my hut, and there was this small tree that was like just a few feet away. And this was about a week and a half in, right? You've really, your body's calmed down, you've formed your connection with the deity, with the jungle. And often when I was just trying to meditate or do nothing and just take some time, I would often look at this tree. It was right in front of me. It was quite easy. It had these big leaves. It was just doing its thing, whatever. But one day, as I was looking at it, I had the very, very strong sense of also being seen back. And I had never really felt that, where it was like, oh, this thing is also looking at me, and it's witnessing me just like I'm witnessing it. And that 2-lane connection was alarming at first, very strange, but actually very beautiful. It's like, no, like there's a sentience here, there's a power both holding and witnessing me. That was wonderful. Probably the weirdest one, and the one that I was least prepared for and definitely freaked out the most for, was one of the last ceremonies. I would really just, if anyone has read any trip reports online, I had a very classic like DMT trip report experience of feeling like you're on an operating table with these doctors around you. And actually we can jump into this in a second, but I've heard these experiences often called sacred surgery. It's this 3-step process of cutting open, cleaning out, and stitching back up. And this mapped beautifully and perfectly onto our 3 weeks, right? The first week was cutting open, second week was cleaning out, third week was stitching up, and this was in the stitching up week, the last week. And so we drank, maybe half an hour goes by, and not much is happening. But suddenly I opened my eyes, and oh man, there was the overwhelming sense, but also the visual representation. Like I could see this group of, I can only call them doctors, around me. My mattress felt incredibly hard, like I was on an operating table, and it felt like, I've actually never undergone general anesthesia, but I imagine that it was like this experience of waking up after surgery in the operating room with the aftercare team around you. And there were like 5 or 6 of them, and by them, the best way I can describe it is, if anyone has ever seen the Matrix movie, those sentinel robots that like go fly around, where they just look like kind of squids with these tentacles. These were more like organic plant versions of them, where they were basically just a kind of face with a lot of like vine, leaf, tentacle things. And they were just doing the aftercare. One was like checking my heart rate, one was making sure my eyes responded to light, one was checking my hearing and my pulse. And there was like this lead doctor, this lead aftercare specialist, and they were just, again, making sure that I was fine and that surgery had gone well. But there were a few things that really threw me off, because I've had visions before, sure, nothing new, but a few things struck me and actually brought on a little bit of anxiety, because they were unlike anything I had experienced before. The first was that they were more visible when my eyes were open as opposed to when my eyes were closed. That's not totally common. Often it's easier to see your visions with clarity when your eyes are closed. So that was really interesting. The second was that there was this loud, like very loud, droning mechanical noise, kind of like the hum of a really big computer fan. But it was intensely loud, and I thought I was checking for everything. I was like, are there bugs flying around me? Maybe that's the noise I'm hearing. Maybe it's the river. But it was distinct from those. And honestly, like, if it was a song that I was listening to on my phone with headphones in, I would have turned the volume down. Like it was that loud, and I was seconds away from actually sitting up and asking the group in the middle of the ceremony, like, can you hear this? Because I was freaking out. I was like, this is way too loud. I feel like something bad is going to happen. But those two just pale in comparison to the last one, and the last one really set me off. And this is actually how I came to realize that they were around me in the first place, which was the lead doctor. He was like right up in my face, was breathing on me. And that's not a metaphor, right? There was this felt sensation almost on the bridge of my nose, like right between my eyes, of this rhythmic exhale gust of wind. And immediately, I started checking. I like swatted around for bugs, but even then I was like, okay, if it was a bug's wings that were doing that, it would be consistent, because they have to flap constantly, right?
Yeah.
I moved my arms all around to see if there was another human around me, like maybe someone was just trying to talk to me, but no one was there. And it just continued. And again, with the first two, like I could see and hear this guy, like right in front of my face, and he was breathing on me. And that like set me off. Like I had never had whatever you would call them, visions, hallucinations, interactions, like with those three components. And it was overwhelming. It was very like paradigm shattering. That was a really stunning experience.
What were you feeling when you like when the breathing of the entity was happening? What were you feeling like? What emotions were coming up?
It was a mix of both like panic and sheer wonder. Because, you know, with all of these, I'm able to hold a steadiness of like, okay, this is happening for me. Nothing bad is going to come of this. And there, again, as I started the story, there was this sense of them being like the aftercare team. Like they're just checking up, making sure everything is cool. But it went against so much of what I believed, and like so much of how I oriented my understanding of the world, that there was like this panic wonder response of like, oh my god, this is happening, but also like, oh my god, this is amazing, this is happening. And I started sweating a lot. My heart rate escalated really quickly, because there was like, man, this is really not normal. Like this is way beyond anything I had trained for. This is black belt ninja level stuff. But you know, with time, it was both just like, oh my god, okay, I want to keep watching this. Like I want to see what happens. This is fascinating.
So they were the aftercare team. What do you think was the surgery? What went on?
Yeah, so I've loved this like metaphor, this concept of sacred surgery, just because it seems to fit so well. And you can have this experience both in the context of an individual ceremony, but it also extends to encapsulate any number of ceremonies that you do, right? So if you're doing 3 back-to-back, the whole theme will unfold over those 3. And you know, even for myself, like if you're there for 3 weeks, it unfolds over that time. And it's this 3-step of cutting open, so really just opening you up, like get in touch with your emotions again, get comfortable with yourself, like just that is the work that needs to be done. Then this huge cleaning out, this letting go of whatever is causing the illness, right? That's when you get highly purgative experiences, right? You're really just emptying the vessel and cleaning out, or you're releasing all those things that you've held on to, right? The traumatic memories, the negative self-image, right? You're really letting go of that and clearing out your system. And then, like any good operation, you get stitched back up, and you're a little raw after the experience, right? You still need time to heal and take your time to rest, but they put everything back together again. And again, we spoke about, you know, some of the objectives of what you might start surgery for, right? You're carrying around traumatic memories, you're carrying around extreme anxiety, extreme uncertainty about your future, right? Limiting beliefs, all this stuff. Like that's what you can go in to the surgery for. And one thing that came up as I was just reflecting and writing about this process was like, there are 2 huge pitfalls that we get into with this process. The first is thinking that we are the doctor and not the patient, thinking that we need to control everything and that we need to think our way and be actively involved in everything. And the second is just wanting the surgery to go some other way, right? When neither of those are the case, right? You are the patient. All you need to do is be present with the process. All you need to do is be there and let it happen, and try not to make it any harder than it needs to be, right? Stop resisting, stop kicking and screaming, stop complaining, and then wanting it to be other than it is, right? This is where the resistance comes from, right? You want what is happening to be other than it is, and so you resist it, and that makes more difficulty, and that makes for challenging experiences. But really, you don't need to do either of those, right? You need to be present with the process, and you need to trust that the doctor knows what they're doing. Because one, if you knew how to do this already, you would have done it. You wouldn't be here.
True.
And again, like, you go to certain doctors because they specialize in certain illnesses, and you've come to this doctor for this operation for the results that it will bring, and they know how to run the surgery. So just be there, trust in it, stop resisting, and it will full circle. The process will unfold and work out.
What are these entities? Big question, I know, but I mean, like, we've talked a little bit earlier about what is going on in an ayahuasca experience, but like, to you now, how do you relate to these entities? Do you see them as demigods? Do you see them as parts of yourself, as parts of nature? Like, how are you thinking about these entities that were in the aftercare team for the sacred surgery?
Yeah, we touched a little earlier in the conversation about how the spirit of the medicine could both be an individual entity, or it could just be like this reduced filtering of your mind, kind of like an esoteric versus a scientific frame. And much like everything in society, we're always forced to like pick one and lock ourselves in on that, and I'm not sure I buy that. Just because, like, we don't know, and why not try to find, and more importantly, like, integrate or synthesize all these competing frames, because they can all just serve to give you a better understanding of it. And so I think right now I have two frames that I really would lean to or bring up. The first is, more and more I do have this sense of interacting with things outside of me, right? Very much interacting with the spirit of other sentient beings, right? And so that can be Mother Ayahuasca, that can be certain plants. I think that is I think that's one of the dominant views in shamanism right now, or traditional shamanism, is you are interacting with essentially the spirit world, right? And so they have an external objective existence outside of you. It is another thing that you are interacting with. And more I do actually start to feel that, and I've had experiences that seem to give that credence. The other frame that I love is really kind of inherited from Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious and the archetypes, right? A nice frame for this is like, if you wanted to give someone a lesson that could stand the test of time, right, a framework that was always relevant, you wouldn't make it like very specific, like on Tuesday, September 26th, 2054, this thing happened, and these are the steps they took, and this is how it was resolved, because that's so narrow, it's only relevant in that time span, right? But if you wanted to give a lesson or a teaching that could stand literally the test of time, like over and over again, you begin to have something that looks more like myth, more like stories, more like archetypes, because you can always project your situation into them, right? This is why, like, Even though Lord of the Rings is entirely fictional, like, you can relate to the struggle. You can relate to the feeling of isolation that comes when all the responsibility is put on you, and you have enemies and you have allies, right? Entirely fake, but in many ways almost more real, right? It's like this level of abstraction that makes everything a little more real.
Mm-hmm.
And to tie this all back, like, I think a lot of the visions and the entities, they can often be these archetypal expressions. Like, you might see, like, the phoenix, right, that burns down and is reborn from the ashes, right? And that's like you're burning everything that is not you. You're burning the old you so that the new one can be reborn. And that doesn't have to be a separate thing. That can just be the best way that the lesson can be taught to you, right? Or, like, again, these common motifs in these experiences, something like snakes or jaguars, or these strong animals that come in, and it's like you can project your situation there. You can learn the lessons. You can learn the strong, calm power that comes from the jaguar. You can learn the adaptability and the flexibility that comes from the snake, right? Like, in many ways, these things are communicating timeless truths to you. And so right now I lean on both of those, right? Maybe they are these external objective things that exist outside of me, or they could just be the best way that the lesson could be taught to me.
Mm-hmm. I get that. Like, that's a wise, balanced perspective. And I think if you were to teach someone, or trying to explain what went on to another person, I think those frames are really useful to give, like, to give both, like, sort of opposing perspectives. And it's totally fine if you're not clear on one or the other as being the most true to you at this point. With regards to things like spirit animals, how do you see spirit animals? Because I know in ayahuasca plant medicine retreats, animal motifs come up time and time again. And in fact, if you look at a lot of shamanism artwork, you'll see, like, snakes and jaguars and tigers and owls, these, like, epic animals. So, like, what is your view on spirit animals at this point?
Yeah, this actually became a larger part of my process throughout the weeks than I was initially expecting. I had never related to that concept at all in any meaningful way. I always viewed it as this, like, woo-woo mystical thing, like, oh yeah, my spirit animal's an eagle. Like, what does that mean? Like, regardless, even with everything we've talked about, I still approach these experiences from a very, like, scientific, psychological perspective, right? It's like, I want to help people. These things can do that, right? And there's emerging science that supports it, so I want to see what it can do, right? And so I always approach this topic with such trepidation and hesitation because it just sounded so strange. And so I went in the second week with that as my intention. Like, cool, connect me to my power animal. Show me what this is and what this means and how it can work. And not a whole lot came up in the ceremony as an answer for that. And I brought that up in our group discussion the next day. And our guide, she eventually ended up telling me later in the day where she floated the idea, right? She was like, a wolf. Your animal is a wolf. And again, that fell kind of flat. It fell kind of flat for me. I was like, okay, cool. Like, what does that mean? And so that whole notion carried into the following ceremony. And fast forward, I find myself isolated in the washroom again, my little hiding place at the edge of the universe, and I'm basically I'm essentially on like all fours. I'm like leaning over, I'm resting my hands on the ground, my feet are on the ground, and I'm like leaning over a bucket, right? A purge had just come, and I was in that position, and I have a headlamp on my head, so it's illuminated. And I look at my legs and my feet are growing longer and getting really hairy, right? My hands have curled up into fists, and my fingers are like merging together, right? And growing hair. And in my kind of like drunken, under the influence state, I chuckled. I was like, I'm like a werewolf, right? Because that's like the classic process of a that you see in movies. You know, your limbs grow, your hair grows, whatever. And immediately when I said that, just this cascade of like clicks happened. And it was like, oh my god, like I'm becoming a wolf, right? And I was like, okay, let's see where this goes. Like the thing is happening. Let's do this. And what happened is the more I leaned into it, the more you can like embody the traits of that animal. And so what I mean by that is like I had this very calm power that I imagine an alpha predator would have, right? That strength that comes from I am the dominant animal here. I can take on any of you, but because of that, I don't need to assert myself, right? I just know that I have that power. There was this extreme clarity of mind that came from singular focus, right? Animals are great at that. They don't ruminate, right? They're just locked right in with an extreme focused gaze. And that was a really, really powerful experience. But what happened as the days went on is I could use this as a frame of reference to conduct myself. And so we're in the sharing circle the next day, right? And I'm relaying this whole experience. And the way I speak is slower, more powerful, more focused, right? And it's like, oh, okay, I'm embodying these traits now, right? Mm-hmm. There's this confidence in what I'm saying because I know that I can be like the alpha, right? That I have that raw power always available to me. And another, probably my favorite way this came was in the following ceremony. I was sitting up, my legs were crossed, and I was getting really tired, right? So I leaned forward, I was like resting my face on my arm. I looked like kind of a mess, right? And immediately, and I felt like a mess too, right? It's a difficult experience. But immediately this question flashed through my mind of like, is this how an alpha wolf acts? Like, is this how it would conduct itself? And immediately the answer was no. And so right away, I sat up straight again, right? I focused myself. I got my shit together, and everything carried on beautifully. And it just tied everything together so nicely, right? It doesn't have to be this weird woo-woo concept. It can actually just be a tool like anything else, where in each moment you're basically asking yourself, like, what would this do? How does this animal act? Right? And you can carry that into your disposition and your way of being. And that, in many ways, that's the point, right? It's not like a guardian angel outside of yourself. It's not this thing like opening paths for you. No, it's you share the same energy, you share the same being, and you can like put that forward whenever you want. And that's been a very powerful frame. And so the only way that this term became relevant for me was actually a much more like practical angle as a tool that you can use to conduct yourself.
Let's go back to the tree experience for a minute. So how do you think the tree was perceiving you?
It felt like being in the presence of like great elders. Just this place of deep knowing, like, yes, I see you, I'm honoring the work, I'm witnessing your process, and I am here supporting.
How could a tree see you though? Like, are you like, because I get like a tree could sense you, and I'm not trying to be like reductionist or like overly scientific, but I'm sort of, I'm trying to figure out like what kind of seeing was happening, because if you were to criticize me as being overly scientific, you know, I could right back at you, say that you're anthropomorphizing a tree. So it's like, you know, there's a bias somewhere. So like, how do you think that the tree was sensing you or perceiving you? I mean, I know you don't know the answer to that, but I'm just curious what you have thought about it.
Yeah, I think the answer is actually right there in your question, which is like, you know, what is the act of seeing? Seeing is a sense. So in essence, whenever someone sees you, they're also sensing you. So yeah, it didn't have to be so much visual as an acknowledgement of another presence. It just felt overwhelmingly like it, or whatever sentience it had, was also just aware of my own kind of energy and presence there. That
Gotcha.
I was not a singular person in this inanimate dead world, but rather there was a multitude, like there was a community there, living there in harmony together.
So they were two complex organisms with like a very complicated chemical process going on, but in both you and the tree. Both were alive, both were able to interact with the environment, and because you were sort of tapping in to like deeper states of awakening or something like that, like waking up more, you were able to sense the tree in a new way that enabled you to sense the tree sensing you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense, because sometimes you can be like, you can just feel like someone's behind you.
Yep.
Without seeing them, without hearing them. It's just this kind of like, it's like a chemical process. It's like the body knows. Would you say it's like that kind of thing when you saw the tree seeing you?
Yeah, you know when you're being witnessed. And actually, your point exactly there. There are actually studies out that have shown that people can, better than mere chance, very reliably detect and correctly answer if they are being watched from behind. Like this was actually done in a lab where, you know, people blindfolded in a room, and either someone would stand behind glass looking at them or not, and they could reliably get it correct. Like, you know, yeah, probably your body knows better than the mind knows that it's being witnessed. And to have what made that experience like beautiful and somewhat shocking was that it was with something that wasn't human, right? It was this, you know, I think most people can agree, like, you know when your dog looks at you, you know when your dog is perceiving you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to have that be with something that that I believe we commonly like discount, something like really just organic material, organic life, trees, plants, the jungle, to have the same feeling come from there was beautiful and eye-opening and somewhat alarming. Yeah, because it's this recognition, like, we are all here together, right? This is not only my game, this is everyone's game, this is everything's game.
I'm trying to picture you in the moment of you seeing the tree seeing you. I'm trying to picture that in my mind. Like, what was going on? Did you have like a chuckle? Were you kind of a bit scared? Were you just like staring at the tree in awe for like an hour? What happened?
It's almost like when you are looking across a big room, like a cafeteria or a classroom, and the other person across the room suddenly looks back at you, and you like hold your gaze longer just because they finally like turned around and witnessed you. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like that, where it was like, okay, wait, the thing is actually happening right now. Like, what do I do? And then it's like, okay, where does this go? What comes next? And so I just held the gaze, basically trying to keep my cool.
When you were going through this difficult diet, you were also told to abstain from like sort of violent. I'm guessing because this is the typical diet, like violent and sexual material. Is that correct?
Yep.
What was that like? Just being like free of all that.
It was amazing, right? Because we often think of diet as a physical process, right? Just a restriction of food intake, essentially, either in volume or in specific kinds of food. But the diets here are also kind of psycho-spiritual in nature too, right? You're limiting the input, variety, and volume of what's coming into your mental space, what's coming into your spirit, right? You're not watching violent movies, you're not engaging in sexual acts. And with this, in the absence of almost every stimuli, right? You don't have your computer, you don't have phone, you don't have people, you're really just there by yourself. It creates this, essentially because there's so little going on externally, it heightens everything going on internally. You notice any deviation from center, you notice any distraction that comes up, and I just got this vivid sense of how many games my mind likes to play. Like, it was always just, oh, I wish I could talk to people right now. And it's like, okay, well, I can't do that. And you relax further into the experience. And then immediately it's like, okay, well, can I work? Can I figure out something I can do? Can I be productive in some way? And you're just slapped with this resounding no. You can't do any of it because none of it is there. And you're just forced, like really forced, like you're pushed into it to just settle and relax, like deeper and deeper into yourself and into the environment. And it's beautiful. It creates that space that we've been talking about, right? That space, time, and energy. Because you can't direct it anywhere else, you get to direct it all at yourself. And you watch this process unfold. You watch, with so little kind of mental activity going on, anything that popped its way up there became important and highly salient, and you could really dig into it. Like, why am I thinking about my family right now? Why am I thinking about work? Is there something unresolved there? Why do I feel confident? Why do I feel weak right now? Why is that coming up? Because we learned, like, it's coming up for a reason. It's either being let go of, or it's indicating that it needs to be worked on.
Did you find on the retreat itself that you were ever tempted to break any of the rules of the dieta, or break your integrity? I'm not saying like you necessarily did this, but were you ever tempted, or did you do it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely tempted. Just because, oh man, the games your mind can play with you are amazing. The classic, like, it's just one cookie, doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Right? But then that's the slippery slope to just cascading into eating the entire chocolate cake. And yeah, there was all of that, right? I was still coming from the sense of like, I don't understand what all of these things do. I'm not sure I see the benefit. So it was like, what if I just masturbated one day? It's just one day. It's not going to do anything. It's not a problem. Right?
It's just one day.
And
just
you're just,
a few minutes.
Yeah, and you're just trying to justify it to yourself and playing all these games, and it's like, oh yeah, but that would actually help me relax more, and then I'd be more calm and I could go deeper into process, right? Like in an instant it's suddenly become this beneficial thing that you now seem silly for not doing. And oh my goodness, the amount of excuses and justifications and rationales that can come up are incredible. Outside of that, there wasn't really an option or an opportunity to break it, because like you didn't have access to the kitchen, so it's not like you could have meat or salt or fruit or any of that. There was no cell phone signal whatsoever, right? There's no electricity, so you can't even use your things even if you wanted to. So in that context, it again, that's why I said it forced you over and over again to settle into this, because even if you were willing to step out of integrity, you couldn't.
Okay. And did you have any like ways of dealing with that monkey mind, that rationalizing force that, I love how you put it, like can make this bad idea one moment, like the world's greatest idea a few thoughts later, if it just gives you some sort of hedonic reward?
I think the easiest way, this is something that meditation just affords us beautifully, is over time you realize that these things are incredibly transient. Like, although it comes up and although it's able to spin itself into the world's greatest argument, it's also the world's most transient argument, right? If you just acknowledge it, it goes away in like, 30 seconds, a minute. Like, it just comes up and tries to make an announcement, and if you don't give it an audience, it just goes on its way. So if I was struggling with something, often just a context shift could work. Like, if I'm outside, why not just go lie in the hammock for a bit and it'll pass? Or the opposite, if I'm inside and maybe just getting out into the open air and walking around a bit can help. If something was still persistent, it actually became a tool in that way. It was like, okay, I have had this thought 8 times today. Something is there. Something is unresolved. Something wants to be known. And so I would just go right at that point. I would just pick up a pen and be like, I am thinking about this. And then it just spirals on, and many times you could get to some sort of lesson, or you could get to some sort of resolution. But really, just being with it. Not making it an enemy, making it a friend.
That's amazing advice. I think that's really powerful advice. Seeing the transience of the arguments and the feelings you'll get if you get what you're after. Epictetus, in his handbook, actually, he had this really short paragraph where he said something to the effect of, every time you feel tempted to do something that is not in your best interest, meditate on the sort of empty feeling of sort of dirty satisfaction that you will experience after it, and then sort of, instead of saying no to the pleasure, you say no to that feeling after the pleasure. It's like really tapping into that, because we can become blind of the moment after we get what we want, and we become consumed by the chase itself. It's like a dog chasing a rabbit. It's like it's so fixated on getting the rabbit, doesn't realize that imagine if the same dog was thinking while chasing the rabbit that if I catch this rabbit, I'm going to be pretty bored for the next 8 hours until my bedtime.
Yeah, this is like why there's such a stigma around addicts and addiction. There's this disdain of like, can you really not control your impulses longer than 12 seconds? Right? And even if people don't say that outright, that's often the undertone. Because we get the sense like, no, you have willpower. And really, regardless of how strong the thing is, like, you can always choose to do otherwise. You can always choose to be composed. And yet, many of us get swept away so quickly. Oh, I finished dinner. Like, it's just 1 scoop of ice cream. It won't matter. Or like, that urge will only last for like 2 minutes. And it'll go away. And then you won't need it. Same thing with like masturbation. Same thing with sending stupid messages to people when you're angry. Like, hey, I have this urge to text my ex at 2 a.m. on Saturday night. Right? If you actually just sat with that for more than 12 seconds, it would go away. But we can't. We get swept away so quickly. Oh, this thing is coming up. I have to immediately act on it. Like, who told you that, man? Like, no. Just sit there and it will go away. Everything. And the part that generates hedonic, like the hedonic treadmill, is that the good things go away that quickly too. That's what we don't realize, and that's the kicker of it, right? Oh, I'm gonna be super happy if I get this car. Yeah, for 12 seconds, and then it's gonna be your car, right? All these things, everything is super transient. All of it just fades away immediately, right? the amazing rapture of your new relationship fades, right? That fancy new phone you got just becomes a phone just as quickly as you got it. Like all these things, both the good and the bad. And knowing that frame is extremely helpful.
Yeah, totally. That's it's a bitter pill to swallow. When, like, I've just had a new laptop, and I'm kind of, before I put my laptop down, I'm kind of wiping the desks at coffee tables, and making sure that like no grime gets onto my laptop. But if I'm honest with myself, in 6 months' time, I'll be putting that laptop in my bag without a case on it. I won't be treating it with the kind of respect and reverence that I'm treating it now in the early days. And I think 2 insights need to be garnered from this. The first is, in knowing that I will one day place less value on this laptop or anything new and novel, what is the real value of it? Is it the value when I first have it, or is it the value 6 months from now? And maybe I place too much value on it right now. The other insight is that maybe I won't put enough value on it in the future. Maybe the real value of it is somewhere in between, and that would be perhaps the ideal sort of consistent value of it. So if you fall in love with someone, it's probably not sustainable or healthy to be completely infatuated with them for the next 50 years. But at the same time, it's probably not a good idea to be taking them for granted and bickering with them for about 50 years. So it's somewhere in the middle that's probably the sweet spot when it comes to like sort of functional value. And I know the Stoics had exercises for both of these things, sort of like appreciating what you've got by imagining yourself losing it, and then also on the flip side, when you overvalue something, there are exercises for sort of breaking it down into the basic elements. So instead of seeing this laptop that I have as some magical portal into another universe that puts me above other people, Marcus Aurelius might think of it like it's glass, it's metal, it's plastic. It will be one day probably in a scrap yard, dusty and completely inadequate. So like balancing the both views.
Yeah, and none of this, I even just want to underscore that, right? None of this implies like ungratefulness or that you have to be miserable all the time. Right, which people often associate that with, but it's just, it prevents you from getting swept away, right? It allows you to keep your center and stay grounded, right? The other way I love that story is like, so you have this cup that's really nice, right? Imagine it and interact with it like it's already broken, and therefore actually every day it's not broken, it's amazing. What a gift. Like, what an amazing gift. This thing is still working and still perfect. But then the day comes when it is broken, and it's no big deal because it's been broken to you the whole time, right? This is why death in the family can just completely derail people, right? Even though it's the only thing in life that's guaranteed for every person, and yet somehow we forget that fact. Like, for many of us, it sounds morbid. It's like next time you're interacting with your parent, remember that they're gonna die, right? And it's like, oh, I don't like that. So therefore, every day you actually do have with them becomes that much more beautiful.
Yeah, great point. Epictetus encouraged us to think of our childs as mortals when we kiss them before bed each night, so that when we wake up and see them in the morning, we'll see it as such a gift instead of just another day, because it certainly is a gift. I wanted to ask you something personal for a moment. You've done a lot of deep work, you've done a lot of shadow work, you've done plant medicine with this dieta and then the 4 apotheosis retreats prior. Do you... Let's try and be really real and honest here and raw. Try and tap into what I'm about to ask you. Do you think that you have attained a good character? And to follow up with that, are there any major flaws in your character or way of being for which you feel shame and like the obvious motivation to change?
What an amazing question. God damn. So to address the first part, what a lot of, actually, this is a nice starting point. Much of this work so far has actually just been in helping me very clearly define what it means to have a good character and how to conduct yourself in that way. Right? Because super easy to say, like, yeah, I know what that means. Okay, define it for me. Like, tell me what a good person actually does. Tell me how they conduct themselves moment to moment. Tell me the beliefs they have. Tell me the times that they would go against those. Right? Like, if we're being honest, and certainly this was the case for me, right? Like, I didn't even have an answer for that. And yet it was something I was kind of joking myself in that I was constantly pursuing. Like, yeah, I want to be good and virtuous. Like, okay, what does that mean? So I've started to really solidify my own working definitions of that. How does a man act in the world? A mature man. What does it mean to be a good human? What does it mean to be human, period? Right? And how do you be a good one? I finally have some answers for those now. Certainly ones that I will continue to refine, but at least I have working definitions now. And the value of having a working definition is that you can compare and contrast your entire being against that. And oh my God, man, I have fallen short and continue to fall short of that endlessly, in endless ways. To make that specific, I was and still am in many ways very bad at reciprocating in my relationships. I have many people who care about me and who constantly reach out, and it's actually, I kid you not, it's become a joke in my circle of friends, and even my nickname in our Facebook Messenger group is Ghost, that I just ghost people, right? Everyone messages me and I never respond for days or weeks, and that's not how I want to act. That's not how I want people to act towards me, and yet I continue to do it, and I continue to fall short. And actually, I've used this perverse justification of like, oh, I don't want to interact with people until I've done all the work and I can show up really well. And it's like, no, the work is right there. It's right there in just reciprocating. If you want to, which I do, right? I want to reciprocate and be good in my relationships, but I continue to fall short there.
What's going on though? What's going on there? I'm just curious. Why are you not reciprocating?
So in many ways, I feel like it was, and this is still unfolding too. This came up a lot throughout the weeks as well. One aspect is a self-worth thing. Why do you want to talk to me when I'm a piece of crap and I have nothing interesting to say and you won't like what I have to say? Right? Just not valuing my own experience and my own value and what I can bring to the table. So it was like checking out before they had the opportunity to, right?
Yes.
That goes back to what we were saying earlier of like, no one can take you away from you, but you can take yourself away from everyone. And I've lived it and I continue to live it, and it sucks. And so seeing that, at least I can start working on it. And it's going probably slower than it should be or that I would like to, but it's definitely moving along. A very big one that came up during this week, and if I'm being honest, it always existed, but it was finally brought into awareness here, is that my fundamental mode of being in the world was always wanting. It was always, what do you have to give me? And never being satisfied. Like expecting people at work to do things for me and then give me credit. Or again, this ties back into the friend example of like always expecting other people to follow up with me, and yet I never initiate a conversation. It's always this self-centered disposition. And I had waves of shame come up in the weeks, and particularly in some ceremonies, of going through it, right? Here's how you take and take and take without reciprocating from your parents, from your friends, from your work, from your culture. And it was shame was the word. It was like, this is a shameful way to act in the world, particularly from me, who I've been trying really to like dedicate myself to being of service to people. That's what I want to do with these experiences. I want to give. And to see all the ways that I've been falling short of that and continue to was very difficult. And really, it wasn't a nice experience to sit through that. But it was important because it showed me, it was like, here's how you're still falling short. Here's what you say you want. Align those two. Take corrective action. This is the integration process, right? The lesson has come up, but you have to do the work now.
Yeah, that's huge. I resonate so much with what you say. I think that I also have similar patterns, and I was just thinking as you was talking, like, where does this come from? And I think it's from my vantage point, it's a faulty belief. It's like a faulty conclusion about something that is stuck, and that faulty conclusion is that other people and their messages and their sort of small talk or whatever, just like they're sort of pinging on social media, that is a distraction. That is a distraction. Even if it feels good to reply, it's a distraction. It's got this like negative thing about it. Like it's distracting, right? You want to sit down, you want to do some work, you want to achieve your goals, you want to grow. It's like you have a to-do list, you have self-care habits, routines, and this like pinging, these Facebook messages, WhatsApp messages are a distraction. But actually, if we examine that, no, they're not a distraction. They're only a distraction in certain contexts. They're a distraction when you're plugged in, you are doing work. But when that work is done, I don't think that you need to think of these as distractions, but rather people who are reaching out, trying to show you love, and perhaps this like feeling of seeing it as a distraction is like carried on and become like a sort of a permanent global belief that is actually causing you more harm than good. That's sort of how I'm thinking about it at the moment. If I dig into it, what are you thinking?
Yeah, and that's a really important point. Like, this is a person with all the same shit going on that you have, and they are taking that extra step and reaching out to you, right? And again, this is yet another thing that we take for granted, right? I have met them, I've interacted with them, people who never get those. There are people who never hear from their parents. There are people who have no friends, people who will not check up on them. And yet we have the audacity to take those messages for granted, and further than that, be annoyed by them. Like, oh my God, how backwards. Something that came up which felt like a very important domino for me, and again, this is another shining example of deep process where you peel back all these layers. Eventually I got to this point of, I operate in this needing, wanting mode all the time because I need the validation and attention from other people. And more importantly, I need that validation because I don't give it to myself. Right? If you cannot give it to yourself, you have to take it from the world. But it's drilled into us, right? If you're not being productive, you're not worthy, and you're not a good member of society. And so if you feel like you have to justify your existence, but you don't. You are innately beautiful and worthy and valuable, and you can tell yourself that. Like, hey, things are tough. I have challenges. Sure, but I'm doing a great job. I love me. And if you can do that to yourself and believe it, more importantly, believe it, like actually feel it, be like, wow, yeah, I'm really proud of myself. You don't need that from other people. You don't need to be grasping at all these things and taking. You can actually then, from this really beautiful place, give it as a gift to other people. But it has to start from you. It has to start with, I am complete and whole and worthy, and I don't need anyone to tell me that, because no one can take that away from me. Right? That's always inside of me. Right? No one can take you away from you, but you can take yourself away from everyone else.
Yeah, it's, again, like, I think someone should write a book, or like maybe we could do some articles on high existence or something, about these like obvious fundamental truths, these like obviously good things to do that nobody does. Like, so we talked earlier in the conversation about like when something so there are two things that come to mind that we've talked about. Is you said that, realizing that being composed is always within your control, right? Like, just like get that in your head. It's like you never have an excuse to not be composed. If you don't want to be composed, that's fine. That's your choice. But nobody or nothing makes you not composed, unless it's like, an electric shock or something. But other than crazy knee-jerk reactions, you have the power to be composed. Second, you have a choice to the degree at which you are harmed. Every time something bad happens or something harmful happens or someone insults you, you can say that this is my impression that is harming me, not the source of the impression. And because this is not the source of the oppression, this impression is nothing to me. That's like a Stoic reframe, but it's seeing into seeing that it's your opinion of it. That's the problem. Simple, but like, do we actually practice this? Like, rep it out and drill it to the point that we are black belts at these simple ways of perceiving and thinking and using our mind. And then what you just said, like giving yourself validation, like realizing that you are the one in the end who has to be your own cheerleader. Like, do we actually, when we do a good day's work, go, hey, you did awesome today. Like, you did awesome. I'm going to compliment myself and I'm going to feel really good about it. Do we ever do that? Or do we just like have a productive day in work and then just like move on to the next thing? Right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, yeah.
Absolutely. Like, when's the last time you were lying in bed, getting ready to go to sleep, and was like, wow, I kicked ass today? Even if you messed up, like, damn, I brought it and I did well and I'm proud of myself. Probably never. And quite frankly, you should be doing that shit every day. Every single day, man. Like, hey, I did the human thing today and I survived. Booyah. Good job. Let's do it again tomorrow. And yet we never do. And something that came up on this was this recognition that, real philosophy is about action. It's about what you do, who you are, like the actual embodied experience. But we paint it as this like intellectual circle jerk where it's just a bunch of theories and postulations being put around. Now, if you can actually act and commit to do those things, the intellectual arguments actually become incredibly important. because they ensure that we can hit those values constantly in every different context. But if you know in yourself that, like, you know, you come to the recognition of tell the truth, but you're not willing to do that, don't waste your time with the intellectual arguments as to why not lie. Like, you're wasting your time. Unless you're willing to keep that root of this is about action and who I am in the world, the arguments don't matter. And I feel like in many ways, that's like this subtle undertone as to why philosophy has just gone to the wayside in society today. Because everyone subtly knows that they're not actually willing to take the action. They're not willing to do the thing, so why even bother with the study?
Yeah, good point. When it comes to the question I asked you about, like, your own character and your own process, your own journey, you've talked about a few things, but we were kind of went off topic a little bit. We kind of went on topic and went into those things with more depth. Are there any other areas that came up for you as like, wow, this needs my addressing ASAP?
Seeing the value in myself. That was a big one. Actually feeling like I have things to bring to the table.
Can you like give more? Can you elaborate on that? What does that mean?
Yeah. You know, it's come up a few times in this. The further you walk down the path, the further the path extends in front of you. And I've only ever operated under the frame of, oh my God, like, look at how far I still have to go. Like, I have not made any progress. Never once giving myself the benefit of the doubt and saying, and actually turning around and being like, wow, look at how far we've walked. Like, that's a really good job. And actually being like proud and confident in like, no, I actually have like a rich skill set. I have a good like mental landscape. Like, I actually have a lot of value that I can give to people because I have come this far. I never, and still really don't give myself any of that credit. It's always just look at how much is still in front of you. Sit down, shut up, and study, right? But that became a big lesson, and that ties into so many things. That ties into your ability to look people in the eye because you feel worthy. That ties into the ability to speak confidently because you feel like you actually know something instead of knowing nothing. So many things cascade from that recognition. Dude, this has come up so much. Tell the truth. That's still something I work on, right? Particularly when I'm trying to tell people about the work I do or the way I view the future or what I want to do for humanity. I always find myself like either painting it small or exaggerating or beating around the bush. And it's like, why? Why can you not own your story completely and fully and just tell people? Because they actually might love it. But that was a big one.
I was speaking to a friend earlier on today, and I wanted to tell my friend about something cool that I did. It was like my performance at something was particularly good, right? Like at a sport, and I wanted to like share that with my friend. And then just before I was about to say it, I actually kind of like really downplayed what I did to the point of it being untrue. So like I lied, like in a way, like about my performance being worse than it was. Like we tend to think like we lie to make ourselves seem better, but I actually did the opposite. I lied to make myself seem worse to a friend who is very nice and doesn't want to see me fail or anything. It's strange. It's like, I guess the fear of seeming arrogant or too full of myself or being knocked down by his opinion of me if I put myself too high was too painful, and I actually like lost a little bit of integrity by saying that. It's so easily done to slip into that.
This is an incredibly important point, and it's something I really want people to think deeply about. And Jordan Peterson talks about this too, right? You need friends who you can tell bad news to, right? And not have them just be like, oh, you're a downer, like this is stupid, like leave me alone. Like you need people who you can go to with difficult news and they'll hear you and hold space and try to help if that's what's necessary. But you need people that you can be excited about your life with too. Because what you'll notice with some relationships you have is that you go and you tell them something amazing happened. You got this new opportunity, you got a promotion, you nailed it, and they'll actually just immediately default into something like jealousy. Like, oh, you're succeeding and I'm not. And then they'll like downplay the achievement in front of you. Like, oh yeah, I can do that too. Instead of actually being like, no, that was amazing, like great work. Like, so everyone understands that you have to be able to give bad news, but we miss sometimes the importance of actually having people in our lives who we can be truly excited about things with, and have them just be excited for our own excitement and our own success. Like you need people who genuinely want the best for you and are excited and happy to celebrate when that actually happens.
Yeah, geez, I just thought of the, like a friend that I have, and again, I like this person. This person is not so overt to be like changing the subject or like doing some like overt thing if I say good news to, but it's more like this, like the energetic field kind of shifts. So say like I everything's going fine in a conversation, then I'm like, oh, you never guess what happened to me, this super cool thing happened, I got this, I gained that, I experienced that. There's kind of like an energetic shift with this person where their face kind of like tightens up a little bit, and their eyes start darting a little bit, and they kind of get quiet. They don't ask as many questions or come forth. It's like an awkward silence, and it's just like strange. It's like as if they've just shut down, and it's like they're unconsciously like trying to punish me a little bit by withdrawing love. It's so toxic, this stuff. It's I hope if you're listening to this, like, out of everything that we've shared with you over these hours, like, really, if there's one thing that I want you to do from this point onwards, is that whenever someone shares something good about their life with you, really try to feel that emotion that the person is experiencing as your own, and try and feel their success as your own. If you do that, you'll be way happier and you'll have way better relationships. And I would like to be your friend. And if you don't do that, then I'm sorry, but I wouldn't want to be your friend.
Yeah, there's a term that I think was actually pioneered by the polyamorous community, but it applies far outside of that. It's called compersion, and it's taking joy in other people's joy. And like really try to practice that. Because you'll feel better too. Like, if there's someone you love and care about, and a good thing happens to them, and they are happy about it, that should make you happy. Like, just period. Like, that should make you happy as well. Like, wow, someone I love got something they care about. Fuck yes. And yet, if you notice in yourself, and you notice in other people, when you tell them, it often doesn't. It often doesn't.
Yeah, it's such a, oh my gosh, that's such a powerful thing, to feel joy in other people's joy. Sympathetic joy is another way of using the concept. If you were on the dieta in Peru, and I gave you a magic lamp, say you were 2 weeks deep, and I said, Eric, you could rub this magic lamp and get anything you want right now, what do you think you would have said?
Wi-Fi or my friends. Those were the two things. And this...
You said Wi-Fi first, so I'm a little bit offended.
Well, I had... All I wanted to do... not all, but it was a very strong feeling as I was there. I was like, I really want to get this information out. Like, if there's anyone seeking these kind of experiences and could benefit from anything, any form of information I can share, I want to do that. And that's why we're speaking right now. It's like, I'm not here preaching the gospel, but there are people looking and they don't know where to turn and they don't know who to go to. And so I was very strongly pulled to just be like, damn, I wish I could help, be of service. And yeah, it was an important lesson in itself, that, like, seriously, this isn't even an exaggeration. The only two things I genuinely missed were the ability to work, like write and do the work that we do, and my relationships. But nothing else. No fancy food. Didn't miss any food. Didn't miss my phone. Didn't miss like places I lived or feel the urge to be anywhere else. Like, all these things that we preoccupy our time with, like, try not having them for a little bit. You might be surprised that you don't actually miss them. And then what is the lesson there that you don't miss them at all? And yet, when we're back at home, they take up nearly all of our time.
That's a really good point. It's like the average person's on their phone like hours and hours and hours a day, to the point of neglecting their own family members, romantic partners, children. And yet, if everything was taken away, it would not be their phone that they miss.
At all. Not even, not even for a second. The only
thing...
There's
a lesson there.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted from my phone was the camera. Because I was like, what a beautiful place. It'd be nice to have a photo. But even that came and went.
Show people as well when you get back.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of subtlety. There's a lot of subtlety to that, right? But yeah, even that, like we discussed, was a transient sensation, right? Once it passed, I didn't want to do it again. It was just like, oh, this would be nice to have, but whatever.
Yeah, like, how many photos do we have, like, in our iCloud or whatever, that we only happen to look at because we're trying to get to some other photo? It's like we're always trying to grab onto something that is ever changing. Like, I'm like 30 soon. I've got like 10,000 photos or something saved. Like, I don't know how many, but like thousands and thousands. By the time I'm like 80, it could be like 100,000 photos. It's like way. It's like, why? Like, why? Like, what am I gonna do with that?
And here's the kicker. Here's the kicker about the photos thing. So you're at an event, or you're at a concert or a sports game or whatever, and you whip out your phone, right? You're now distracted. You're not actually in the moment, and therefore you don't form a memory of the thing, right? So you actually need the photo because you're not present in the experience, so you can't remember it. But if you just switch that whole thing around and were present and notice the smells and notice the sights and the tactile sensation of holding on to popcorn or something, you'd actually form a very vivid, concrete memory, and you wouldn't need the photos at all. So even though it's like this Trojan horse, where it's like presented as this tool to help us remember, but actually it just makes you better at forgetting. And then you never look at the photos once you take them, so now you have like no memory of all the awesome stuff you did in your life. And that's a shame.
So let's turn this into an actual practice. Like, let's call it mind snapping, something like that. So it's like, from now on, every time you see something that you want to really capture in a photograph, resist the urge to get your phone out of your pocket, and instead imagine that your eyeballs are those like long exposure cameras from like the 1800s, and that you just need to stay still and soak in the environment for like 20 seconds, and you'll thank us later. You want to try doing that?
Yeah, and get full engagement in it, Notice what it feels like to touch it. What does it smell like? What sounds do you hear? The more senses you involve, the more powerful the memory becomes and the easier it is to anchor.
You mentioned recently about you really wanted to work, you really wanted to share this message. Like, it's one of your missions in life now. I'm hearing to help others, and assist and facilitate others, not just on the retreats that you're organizing and facilitating, but in general. Like, you want to be the guy that people come to ask questions, and who feel a bit lost and alone, which is amazing. It's admirable. Going back like 6 years, I didn't have anyone to guide me, and it was people like you and the other High Existence team members that kind of showed me the way. So if people are listening to this, and yes, of course they will be readers of High Existence and listeners to this podcast, and we try our best to share what we can. But if they want to hear more about your perspectives, your voice, and in particular the ETA that you just went on, or ask you questions, like, what's the best way that they can connect with you?
Two main outlets, really. You can hit me on Twitter. Probably spend most of my time there if I'm on digital. Just it's Eric Brown, ITS Eric Brown. You can find my whole author page on High Existence. Been riffing quite a bit. I think I'm at 30 posts now up there. So there's a...
What article should someone read first?
Oh, The Alchemy of Nihilism.
The Alchemy of Nihilism.
Yeah, I used like the 3-step process of alchemy: observation, deconstruction, and reconstruction, to kick nihilism in the ass. And nihilism just being an overwhelming sense of meaninglessness to the universe. And so from that, you can imbue your life with meaning and fulfillment, and I'm pretty proud of it. It's a good framework.
That's amazing. I'm just picturing you kicking nihilism in the ass. Like, what would that look like if life was like a crazy cartoon? That is epic, yeah.
And if anyone does want to read more about the stories, like, I am going to be publishing every note and journal entry I took from this, just as this one massive document, and I think we'll just put the link to it in the show notes or something. If you want to read more and read the mundane parts of what a Tuesday morning is like, it's all there, and all of these experiences, and most of what we've discussed on this is written there as well.
What I was speaking to a friend actually during Apotheosis 2, the second Apotheosis retreat in the Netherlands. We were discussing Marcus Aurelius's meditations, and he made some comment like the meditations by Marcus Aurelius is essentially like a paper map of this iconic philosopher king's mind. That's what it is. It's not a book. It's him. It's him. Like, when you read it, you're becoming Marcus Aurelius for a few moments at a time. And I really want to encourage people to give Eric's meditations a read, because it's not actually just a journal entry or a note. It's an experience, and Eric used one of the best technology of all time ever to transcribe that experience to you. Language. So I can't wait to read it. I haven't given it a thorough read yet, but I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm sure you'll probably like expand upon it and like add footnotes as you learn more as you go on. So it's going to be this like living document.
Yeah, it's this full, like, you watch the process unfold like vividly. I use this metaphor of being strung up like a marionette. You're held up by the plants, with the diet tea serving as like this IV drip, while ceremonies go in and just completely deconstruct and reconstruct you, and you watch my whole psyche unfold with like all the resistance, all the processing, all the like you're doing a good job notes, like all of it's there, and you really just watch this unfolding, and yeah, self-destruction, and then a discussion of who do I want to be when I rebuild myself back up, and yeah, you watch it all unfold, and because to the whole point of like, I'd like to make this information available. If someone is seeking what this experience is like and why it might be useful for them, I want to play my part. And what better way than to, you get the first person view of what this whole thing is like. Like you go, yeah, there's nothing hidden there.
Amazing. Looking forward to diving into that. But I actually think that we should tell people that maybe the ultimate experience they could get would be to hang out with you and maybe me too in real life. And yeah, we have like a bunch of apotheosis retreats. If you go on apotheosisretreats.com, you can see like the upcoming events. But yeah, this is our love. Like, I don't get to see Eric in real life at all because Eric lives in Canada, I'm living in the UK. But we actually come on these retreats together and spend like an intense week of both catching up and doing very deep work. That is like the best way to catch up, really, because you're just so vulnerable and open. And if you want to join us and have these kinds of discussions with us and ask Eric anything that's come up for you as you listen to this, we would be more than happy to welcome you to the Apotheosis tribe. So just putting that out there as a note for you. Do you have anything to add onto that, Eric? And any sort of final words?
I'll just say, yeah, I'm not here to hide. You can find me online, and I'm more than happy to talk. Like, I definitely had my share of struggles, and I'm not here acting like I have the answers. I really don't want it to come across like that. But I'm just saying, if this is something that you want to speak about and you have no one to speak about it with, like, there are people. Really, the one thing I would say is these experiences deserve and demand respect, and you should really treat them with respect. I take a lot of issue now with people who just kind of peer pressure or really are pushy to people about like, oh, you need to go do this, you need to try this. It's like, no, this is not a magic pill. It's very challenging, it's very difficult work, and you really have to choose it yourself. And you really have to be responsible about it. It's not a joke. But all of that said, I will be the first person to like vouch for the efficacy and how important I feel this is, but you have to approach it from that place of respect and responsibility.
Beautifully said. Totally agree with that. More is not always better. Quality is more important than quantity, and having a really strong and clear intention doesn't mean you go into it like already with a clear idea of life or your situation. You can be confused and feel lost, but you go into into this kind of experience with the intention of going into it because you feel confused and lost, as opposed to, oh, I don't really know what I'm going to do with my weekend, I may as well go on like some sort of like profound life-changing retreat. It's like, maybe you should journal and meditate a bit first and just like see what's up. But yeah, I've learned a lot during this conversation. Weirdly, it still feels like we could go so much deeper, but I guess that is one of the limitations of language, is that for us to unpack 3 weeks of experience on this dieta may require 3 months of talking about it or more. So I'm sure we will continue this conversation another time.
John, my brother, what a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the High Existence podcast. I hope that you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, I would love for you to leave a review, a rating, share it with your friends, message us. It's always great to meet people. And I have met some people on the Apotheosis retreat who actually listened to this podcast, and then they came and hung out with me and Eric. And now they're actually really good friends of mine. So yeah, say hi, don't be shy. And I'll see you in the next episode.